Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Saga of Avatar Korra in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Book 3 Lightning. Chapter 19, The Battle of Republic City 2. Asami pushed the accelerator forward and the world blurred a little more. She chanced to glance back. The other planes kept up with her and maintained the V formation behind her. They were following her, following their leader. Asami looked back ahead, determined not to dwell on the thought and the implications. No time now, worry about what it all meant and what the cost was if she survived this. Focus. The Earth Empire airships were a far more pressing issue right now, 3 minutes until they were in range of the missiles. What would she see if she looked below? Assuming anything was visible at this speed and height. The battle should still be going on, but would it even be possible to tell which side was which? Possibly. There were some forces she could safely assign allegiance. The array of mecha tanks visible ahead could only be the Earth Empires, but impossible to tell if they were the comparatively harmless variety or Varric's new revolvers. The ones Zuli, Opal, and Bolin might end up tangling with. "Be okay guys, please," she murmured. Her friends were all down there fighting too. Could she help them by firing at the enemy from here? Nothing like the plan, but it might help make things easier for them. No. How could she be sure what she was hitting? She might hit the Earth Empire, or United Forces. Foe or friend. None of them should be close to her, but no, taking out the airship fleet was more important and would help everyone. Assuming this all worked, of course. No one had been sure for a long time quite how to use the biplanes. Speed was an advantage at getting to somewhere quick enough, but what could they do then? A new technology they were still trying to figure out how to use. They could drop bombs obviously, but timing was critical, and to ensure they hit the desired target they would need to slow down, somewhat nullifying the speed advantage. After test, Asami settled on rockets as the best armament. They could move faster than even the speedy biplane, and the explosive potential had several applications. Though they could only fire straight ahead. Lightning strikes was someone's suggestion for a tactic. Get close to an airship, fire a missile and get away before cables, revolver fire or any rock flung at them by an earthbender. It made sense and had formed the basis of their training. Now they just had to hope they really could aim at and destroy other flying craft. Would the speed of the biplane be more effective than the slower but much steadier vantage point offered by the airships? The radio crackled. "Come in, Red Leader." "Iroh." "This is Red Leader," Asami replied. "No change to the airship formation or speed. I repeat, the airships are gathered into 3 groups and remain a consistent distance from each other. In addition, we have a confirmed sighting of a further 10 craft inbound. Their ETA is 30 minutes. "I copy," Asami replied. "You are cleared to begin your attack run," Iroh added after a pause. "I copy, we are shifting to attack formation." Asami flicked a switch and addressed the entire squadron. "All hands, attack formation Beta." Alpha would have had the squadron remain as a singular group. Beta specified 3 divisions, red, blue, and gold, with 4 planes each. A glance back was enough to confirm the pilots understood and executed the command correctly. 3 craft trailed her in her position as Red Leader. Red group will take the center 4 airships. I want blue to attack the port group and gold to hand starboard. The heads of the other 2 groups confirmed her orders over the radio. Asami fidgeted in her seat as the airships loomed ahead. The crew must have noticed the biplanes by now. How were the craft armed? Hopefully not with revolvers, unlikely based on observation and extrapolation. Still a risk of metal benders, and if they caught a biplane it would fall. Against the mass and engines of an airship, the biplane's tiny fuel tank could not hope to pull away from it, and once forward motion halted it seemed likely a stricken plane would just fall from the sky. There was a flickering flash from dead ahead. Had something shot over her head, far too close for comfort as it blasted through the air. More objects followed, nothing more than blurs. Asami caught a glimpse of one, Earth discs. If nothing else, the airships had earthbenders. Too soon to rule out metal benders too, they could be waiting for them to get closer. "Attention all hands, caution. I repeat, caution. Enemy airships have at least an earthbender contingent on board. I repeat, Earthbenders on enemy airships. The chorus of I copies came straight back. Everyone still accounted for. A splintering crunch and a distant plume of fire forced Asami to look around. Was that, Red Leader? This is Gold Leader, a concerned voice shouted over the radio. Direct hit on Gold 2, craft destroyed, status of pilot unknown. Asami swallowed. I copy, she said, willing her voice not to tremble. Let the pilot be okay. Let the parachutes work, let them have survived the blow. Focus. Speed was not everything, the enemy could still hit them. Maintain formation and prepare for attack. Aim for the control deck. The most obvious target, as much as it was below the bulk of the vessel, if they destroyed that it would neutralize the whole craft. Asami hunched over the controls as she zipped through the final stretches of space, her finger hovering over the trigger for the missile's hold fire. She shouted. I repeat, hold fire. An awkward pause and then her order repeated by Blue and Gold Leader. Hold fire. The plane squadron overshot and passed under the airships, sailing far out beyond them. Red Leader, orders. Gold Leader asked. She grinned. Ignore the control center. I want all attacks to be made on the tailfin. They're not going to be defending that. Another pause. I copy, the two other leaders replied. Iroh had said they needed to get rid of the airships. He never said they had to kill everyone on board. It felt better to do both. Larger target to aim for. Asami threw her craft into a wide arc that brought her back around and shooting towards the airships. Another glance. Everyone was keeping up. Okay. Just like practice, the speed of the airships was negligible enough to consider them motionless at present. Asami squinted down the viewfinder. Little more hard to judge distances like this. Doing her no good to work out duration of fuel burst and wind factors. Explosive yield versus propulsion. She jammed her finger down and sent her first missile fizzing towards the central airship's tail fin. A hit. The missile exploded, shredding the craft's hull. Asami shot past the airship and sent the biplane back the way she came again to survey the damage. Other missiles streaked from her companions and exploded into the other targets. Nothing but a bare frame, fire, and trailing smoke remained when she could see the airship again. And it left everything else intact. The effect was not immediate. Asami arced back and forth a few times before she was certain. The airship was sinking and in a matter of minutes had hit the ground far below. Multiple targets disable. Confirmed, we have 5 airships confirmed grounded, Iroh said. Good work, Asami. Keep it up. Asami grinned. Red group, Gold group, Blue group, continue attacks. Stay up high and avoid the heavy front fire, she said as she sent her biplane in another curving arc to distance herself from the fleet. She cursed as an Earth disk clipped another biplane and sent it spinning to the ground. Maintain altitude until you are ready to attack. She ordered. The rest were staying up with her and together they swept around to attack the fleet again. The remaining 5 craft fell to the ground moments later. Iroh let himself smile as the airships sank to the ground trailing smoke. No time to get complacent, he needed to get the Earth Empire ranks broken. He frowned. General Vera had reported contaminated water near the lake earlier. A cunning plan by the Earth Empire to render the resource unusable, but it would ultimately be a futile gesture. The problem of such extremist views, the Earth Empire had missed the potential waterbenders and earthbenders working in conjunction offered. Lieutenant Cheng. Please get hold of General Fei. But sir, isn't he dash? An order, Lieutenant, Iroh said patiently. Apologies, sir, Cheng said and made the call. General Fei for you, sir, she added a few moments later. He was expecting this. She looked confused. Iroh grabbed the microphone. Fei. Iroh. How long until the battleships are in position? Iroh asked, smiling again at Cheng's surprise. There was little chance the Earth Empire could have seen this move coming. Less than 3 minutes and we'll be in range, Fei replied. Acknowledged. Slight adjustment. Iroh squinted at the map and read out a new series of coordinates. Confirmed. The Earth Empire had sought to block the river leading into Lake Lanao and thus hamper any attempt to bring the larger United Forces vessels up the river. Again the Empire underestimated inter-tribe cooperation and the city's continued drive to improve. 10,000 earth and waterbenders had been digging a new canal from the port straight to the lake over the last few months. "General, we are now in position." "Fire at will," Iroh ordered. A flicker of flame bloomed far in the distance as the oil ignited in a sweeping rush. Points 15 to 18 soon transformed into blazing infernos. A weak spot in the Earth Empire defenses. "Faye. Sir. Select a contingent of waterbenders for a special mission. I want them deployed ready to intercept any reinforcements who will be heading to Point 19. You have full discretion regarding your tactics and selection of personnel. In addition, I want you to continue the cannon fire." "Who am I shooting at?" Faye asked. "No one. I want random fire," Iroh replied. A short pause before Faye replied. "Acknowledged." The battleships were still relegated to the middle of the channel and limited in positioning, but they should still be instilling fear in the Earth Empire. "Ensure you stay out of range of the battleships," Iroh added. It would not take long for the Earth Empire to work out the attacks and regroup. They would likely no longer try to hold the water side, instead they would probably aim near Chenbai in the center of the Guangzhou Plains. At least none of the revolver-equipped airships had entered the fray. "Sir." Cheng called out. "Revolver mecha tanks approaching the battlefield." "Thank you," he replied as he dialed Kia's number. The cloud of blades swirling around Kuvira halted suddenly, the cloud dispersing very slightly and revealing the person in the center. The metal projectiles tilted in unison until everyone pointed at Korra. She paused for an almost fatal moment. In the span between one eye blink and the next, the clouds of blades was hurtling towards her. An inverted rain of stabbing spears and wickedly sharp blades rushed up from below. Additional height was no longer any kind of advantage, and at present only seemed to serve to make her more of a target. Her hand moved almost before she could think and the air twisted into a tight coil around her, it spread, twisting faster. The cyclone slowed and sent the blades tumbling away from her, hopefully out of Kuvira's reach. Just needed a moment to catch her breath. Where was Kuvira? Her heart lurched. Kuvira was spinning, and there could be few reasons why she would make such an action. She likely had no less time than her response to the blade rain, but mere wind was unlikely to block the spheres or anything else sent flying at her with that velocity. She reached for the ground, seeking rock rather than earth. Too long. With each passing moment she expected to feel the agonizing sting of the sphere in the moment of impact, the sting that would blossom into pain as time moved forward. Or would she feel anything at all? If Kuvira struck her head, would her end come before she even realized it? Somehow she was still alive as the rock lurched free of the ground below them. Kuvira still span as the rock rose and Korra held it between them. Only just in time. The spheres smacked into the shield with muffled thumps and sharp cracks on impact. Over and over again, fragments of rock scattering and dropping away from her improvised shield. How many of those spheres could she have? It did not bear thinking about, each one weighed so little. She might have hundreds and Korra would not know. It was not as if the weight was an issue for her as a metal bender. The attacks lessened at last after an eternity of waiting. Now to use the water. Korra let herself drop quickly back towards the still solid ice below. She shifted the rock, keeping it between her and Kuvira. Just a little more. A few more meters. 1 foot was all she needed. There. The ice thawed and roared as it melted back into a liquid, the crashing waves drawn up and around her body as she blasted what remained of her rock shield up at Kuvira and sent the surging torrent of water after it. One chance here. Kuvira should not be able to see her right now. Korra twisted the air into a bubble around herself and slid into the torrent. The water slammed into her and carried her forward, higher and higher until the stream plateaued into a rippling, unsteady shape high above the ground. And if it had all gone right, the water would trap Kuvira would in the center. She peered through the surging water. Hard to see anything in here, but the shadowy shape in front of her could only be her opponent. Would this work as a victory? If she just maintained the water around Kuvira she would drown, it would require so little. Just stop her from leaving the water and wait, until her lungs ran out of air. The vague shape seemed to be clawing at the water, thrashing and pulling. Was she trying to swim out? The current would keep her trapped. Kuvira was nearly dead before she had even decided if she could truly do this. Something flickered nearby. No. Not something she had seen, a sensation in her mind, in her chest. Something powerful. Kuvira's motions slowed, but it did not seem to be a weakening, it was as if the struggle was unnecessary. The dark shape shifted, smaller sections breaking off to surround her. The metal plates. Korra pushed forward as the plates welded together, completely enclosing Kuvira. She had to metal bend. Had to do so better than her teacher. Korra reached out to hold the metal in the water. Even if Kuvira somehow had air in there, it was not like she could survive underwater indefinitely. To Korra's amazement, she took hold of the sphere. Was she really less strong than Kuvira? Had it all been a bluff? The sphere ripped out of her grip and soared into the open air. Korra lashed water tentacles after it, each thread trying to encircle and hold the metallic object, but even as one tried to tighten its grip, the sphere ripped through the water. Korra clenched her teeth and shot another strand. It caught on the sphere and held. She added more, determined to not let it slip through her fingers again. The sphere shattered outwards, the metal plates rushing through the water tendrils and destroying their form. The plates narrowed into swords and spears again as a pale, panting Kuvira gasped at the air. Almost. She was weak. Korra could eliminate her before she found her footing again. A metal sphere tore through the water and a burning sensation slashed across her leg, the water now tinted red and darkening. Korra clenched her teeth and fought the urge to shriek with pain. Too focused on winning, and not enough on what Kuvira was doing. Bolin stamped his foot down hard, the sensations rushing back in a moment. The intricate grid of passages and specific locations, just like they had planned. Difficult to see much down here, so far down, and the darkness seemed to overwhelm the lanterns the others were using to move back and forth in the cavity near the borehole. At least he could feel his way around, no need for light. Another bomb slid with a few jostles down into the tunnels. Mari took the device, tugged on the rope, and by lantern light vanished down into one of the numerous passages. Bolin shifted forward, awaiting his turn. How much time did they have? The last report put the normal mecha tank's arrival time in something like 30 minutes, not worth all this effort. The bombs would detonate as soon as the revolver mecha tanks were right over the geyser field. Bolin took the bomb from the rope and squeezed past both Sid and Mari, his helpers, to set it. To Bolin's surprise, both were waiting for him by the time he got back to the tunnel up to the surface. Captain. Mari saluted, Sid mimicking the motion a second later. That was the last of them, we're all set. His heart lurched. So. Time for his other role. Hopefully they would not make this difficult. Sir. Sid asked after a pause. Are you okay? Fine, Bolin said, swallowing hastily. He had to do this. Only he could. It might make all the difference. I'm fine. You two get out of here, I want to double-check the wiring and the placements. His voice sounded so wrong even as he spoke. So obvious that he would be doing something other than what he claimed. To his increasing worry, Sid and Mari exchanged an odd look. Sir? Shouldn't we help too? It'll be quicker with 3 of us, Mari said, frowning at him. She picked up her lantern and started towards the nearest side tunnel. If he was a better liar, she might have just accepted his excuse and be gone. As it was, she only wanted to help. I'm worried about the lanterns, he said. Foolish, they had been ferrying the bombs next to the lanterns all this time. Sid opened his mouth to protest and Bolin kept on hurriedly talking. Not for the explosives, obviously. Zuli. She mentioned something about a flammable gas that might develop over time down here. So we want to minimize any kind of flame down here. Was that convincing enough? But Dashmari began. I'll be fine, I will use my seismic sense. No risk of accidental explosion, and the less of us at risk the better. Neither Sid nor Mari moved. Come on. Go. This is an order, soldiers. Go. Yes sir, Sid said after a pause, Mari echoing him reluctantly. He watched until both had hauled themselves sufficiently far up the tunnel. No guarantee they would not turn back and insist on helping. Not entirely true, they were military. They followed orders. Bolin gave them a longer moment to get higher, to where the noise of his next task might not be quite so obvious. For a moment the impulse came to seize the rope and follow them up, out into the open, the sunlight, the fresh air. The Paisho board. 3 rock layers stood between him and what Opal insisted on referring to as the crystal layer. 3 hours until the planned detonation, or at least that had been the timetable when they started planting the explosives. Hopefully more than enough time. He wanted to survive if he could. Get down to the magma, get back her and get up the tunnel before either lava or boiling water overtook him. One more breath. One more minor delay. Bolin dropped to his knees and started pummeling the ground. The rock split and burst around him like it was nothing. Seismic sense kept the impression of his progress vivid. He was at the bottom of an ever-deepening pit. Further and further down, he had never been this far below ground before. The crystal layer hampered him for a while until he realized how best to deal with the hardened jagged edges and break through them with clean sweeping motions. Tinkling shards of crystal kept spilling into the pit he dug, the echoing noise disrupting any sense of solitude. Was that someone shouting to him? Sid? Mari? Zuli? Opal? What if it was Korra trying to tell him he did not need to do this? No. Korra would not shout from afar, she would come to get him. There was no one at the top of the pit, there could not be. It was just him in the darkness. The tinkling faded after a while and he could hear little more than his own breathing accompanied by the dull smack of his hands into the rock. It was softer here, almost chalk-like. This was the last layer. Once he was low enough he should find. Bolin's hand pushed into a void. He paused for a moment and broke the rest of the rock away beneath him and dropped down into the remnants of the magma tunnels. Old, cold and long since devoid of boiling magma. But only just. The lava was flowing nearby, not that far below him. It seemed as if he was standing on an impossible thin strip of rock, the only thing between him and fiery immolation. The lava pulsed and flowed nearby, always away. If he guessed right, it was flowing towards the Chenbai. Just like Opal described. Oddly entrancing to feel it move. Somehow it seemed presumptuous to refer to himself as a lava bender. Yes, he could melt rocks into the substance and use it as a weapon, but that scarcely compared to the feel of the vast lake, no, the vast sea of lava below him. He shook himself. Something if he made it back out. Bolin slapped the rock above his head, focusing on the sensation, trying to inscribe the feel of this intersection in his mind, unable to stamp for fear that even so small a movement might shatter the barrier. This was the way out, and he needed to find it again. Time to move. Once the magma was risen to this level, the intense heat would quickly melt all the layers above it and rise with it. Everything would push up. If his timing was correct, it should reach the layer beneath the bombs just as they detonated. The water table would crash down to meet the lava and superheat. Few options for the water to go but up and out as geysers. Super hot geysers. The revolver mecha tanks would find themselves on a battlefield raining down scalding water that would turn the ground to mud in seconds. All in theory, as confident Iroh could be from a vain conjecture Opal had not wanted to dwell on. And it all hinged on him getting the lava up to the right level and right moment. He could do it. And he could get back out in time, he had to. Bolin paused. This should be far enough. The lava surged and flowed right under his feet. No light down here, hopefully he had kept count well enough. Time to begin, he muttered, bracing himself for the run back to the way up. For Republic City. For the world. For family and friends. For Korra. For Mako. He slammed his foot down hard, breaking the rock ahead of him apart even as he melted it. The glare was dazzling for a moment as the pool of lava formed. It exploded into incandescence as the lava surged up and flowed over his meager efforts. Bolin stepped back. The flow was too slow. He sighed and melted more rock, ripping and shattering it, the broken fragments falling down into the sea beneath. The lava surged up, the boiling mass almost splashing against the tunnel roof. Too fast now, the flow was sweeping towards him and picking up speed. Better, he grunted as he ran back to his escape route. The glow built behind him and banished the darkness as he ran. No time to check on it, no time to look back, all he could do was rely on the sensations from his seismic sense. The lava was not far behind him. Bolin leapt and hauled himself up in the tunnel, tensing for the horrifying moment the lava would touch him, claim a foot or a leg, or the moment never came, but he could not let himself the luxury of relief. That would be later when he was on the surface. For now he had to keep moving. Bolin struggled up and up, the glow below him remaining consistent, the rock painted in shades of red, orange, and yellow. The air was wonderfully cool in the crystal layer, a relief contrasted to the sweltering environment below. He scrambled up to the official tunnels. He was almost there, but had no time to dawdle. He could not have long left. Should be a few more minutes. The first blast threw him off his feet as he neared the borehole. The bombs were early, or he was late. His ears were ringing as he struggled upright, only to be knocked back by another blast. Bolin struggled to get upright. The lava could not be far behind. The water would be coming soon. He could barely blink as the tunnel roof dropped towards him. Sid and Mari scrambled out of the tunnel mouth and lay panting on the ground. "Good work," Zuli said. She peered into the tunnel and frowned. "Where's Bolin?" "Told us to leave him and get clear," Mari replied. "He said he wanted to check some things before getting clear." Opal frowned as she wandered closer. Almost tempting to shout down or go down and drag him back up herself. Plenty of time before detonation, but it felt uncomfortable for him to be down there in the dark while explosives were ready to go off. The mission brief Opal swallowed hastily. Her mission had been to prepare and train the team about the geology of the area, and it had already ended the moment the drill stopped. No one had ever said anything about Bolin coming back up. Her heart lurched. He was not supposed to come back, or there was a chance he would not. "Iroh," she growled. "What was down there?" "Lava." Lava was down there, masses and masses of lava. She glanced at her watch. Quickly. "Someone. I need paper," she said. Zuli blinked at her panic. Opal could do little but shake her head, snatch the paper and begin scribbling. The odds were terrible, but not wholly against him. There was a vanishingly slim chance that Bolin could breach the layer and get out again. If he did not even try, less risky. The chances of him surviving came courtesy of a lot of assumptions, amongst them the assumption that her own conclusions about nature of the area were correct. Could they even hope to get him back out now? No light down there, no way to find him. And was there enough time to take a trip down to haul him back out? Opal slumped and Zuli crouched beside her, murmuring questions. She could not bring herself to tell her. Tell her what Iroh must have asked and what Bolin must have decided. A risk of his own making, and with no one around who might even be able to interfere. No wonder he had opposed either wing or way accompanying them. What could they do now then? Just sit here to wait and hope? Opal stared towards the battlefield, Zuli's comforting arms around her. The water pumps were still working overtime amidst the chaos while the United Forces mecha tanks sped across the field. The machines were good enough against human targets, but near worthless in combat against other mecha tanks. Rock and ice walls were currently helping keep the Earth Empire vehicles at bay, and as per Asami's certainty, eventually they would run short of fuel and near useless. Opal shivered. Once mecha tanks might have seemed the worst thing they could face, but their risk was somewhat supplanted by their successors. Revolvers were a far more pressing concern. Zuli murmured she would be back and slipped away as wounded soldiers limped into Point 4. Opal shook herself and trailed after her partner, unable to resist another fleeting glimpse at the tunnel entrance. Bolin had not shown himself on cue as she wished. The sound of conflict grew closer, but she had no time to worry about that as she helped the medics as best she could. Then something else cut through all the noise, a series of tinny explosions. "Fall back," Kia's voice crackled over the radio. "Fall back now. Point 4, you have to get clear. Revolvers are approaching your position." Opal looked up in a panic. Sure enough, the heavier, bulkier mecha tanks were rumbling into view. A number of United Forces soldiers immediately panicked and dropped their defense. The closest mecha tank halted, and what looked like a flickering beam of light burst from the bulky mechanism welded to its shoulder. Any place that light touched became ruptured and torn. Rock splintered and broke as it moved across it, blood sprayed as limbs separated from bodies, torsos from legs. They needed to move, and now. Wait. Opal blinked. They were not holding fire if any of their own troops got in the way. It did not seem to matter to the revolvers just who was in front of them. They were killing everyone even as their own troops fled the destructive attacks in a panic. Patients were as comfortable as they could be and hurried to the nearest vehicle. Some healers took absurd risks and darted out of the temporary shelter to pull the injured back under cover, not stopping to discern between United Forces and the Earth Empire. A woman lost a leg to the revolver fire and collapsed not far from Opal. She only had to glance at Zuli before both darted out from cover to pull her back to safety. With each passing second, the beam from the revolver mecha tank drew closer to them. Earthbenders started hauling large boulders in between the medics and the mecha tanks. They held, for now, the rocks echoing and vibrating with 1,000 tiny cracks. How long could they hope to resist this assault? "We have to move," another soldier shouted as they moved to the next patient. "Impossible to move just yet." All around Opal, Point 4 began breaking up. Metal benders joined the earth benders and added metal sheets between the boulders. Not as effective as the rock, for every 10 shots the metal protected them from, one broke through, slowly puncturing the metal. Their defenses could only last so long. The revolvers were more powerful than expected. A nurse lost an arm to a flickering in the air and Opal threw herself backwards, staring at the grisly stump the attack left behind. So much blood, the woman's voice pitched higher than she could hear before she heaved a strangled sob. "We need to go," Zuli said as they moved back. But there was a shuddering somewhere deep beneath them. It intensified. Strange. That could not be a result of the bombs, and it was still a few minutes until detonation. Opal glanced towards the tunnel entrance again. Still no sign of Bolin. Another rumble, more powerful than before. Just another quake? But so conveniently timed a cacophony sounded from the open end of the tunnel. That had to be the bombs. A vast surge of smoke and particles of rock rushed out into the air. The ground shuddered again. "Look," Zuli said, pointing. A plume of water had risen above the battlefield. The tall column of water towered into the sky, raining down water. It looked refreshing, it looked cool, but it would burn. Another plume erupted up to match the first and more followed. The revolver fire halted, or maybe they just could not hear it anymore over everything else. Opal glanced out of cover, risking so much, but she had to see. The revolvers were slowing down, their wheels sinking into suddenly soft ground. Still more geysers burst into the air, the thick stench of sulfur coming with them. So this was Bolin's contribution, ensure the geysers were more powerful. Bolin. She rushed to the tunnel entrance, Zuli on her heels. The tunnel still poured smoke, she could not see far down it as a result, but it still seemed to be open. It had not collapsed as a result. But further down? She needed to know. We still have to vacate," Zuli said slowly. "General Kia's orders." "No," Opal said, shaking her head. "Not without Bolin. I know he's still alive. He can't have given up so easily. Not after Dash." Zuli nodded slowly. "Then, I think I have an idea." "Sir, revolvers are approaching our forces," the soldier reported. "We have confirmed sighting of 5 units with a possibility of many more." "Thank you," Iroh replied. He hung up and rapidly dialed Kia's number. "Kia? Revolvers estimated to reach your location in 10 minutes or so. That is in keeping with our scheduled detonation time. Just make sure nothing alters the timing." "Noted. Just hope we don't still have our hands full with the normal ones," Kia replied. "Less dangerous, but still a nuisance." "How are your men holding up?" Iroh asked. How many had he lost and how many remained for use? "The bad news is that one entire battalion is lost. I don't have any kind of accurate read on how many are wounded." Iroh stared out of the window as he listened. The time for the geysers came nothing. Bolin's bombs were late. "Thank you, Kia," he said, interrupting her report. "I want you to pull your forces back. The plan has not begun." "Repeat." "Pull your forces back." But Kia paused. "Has Opal confirmed an issue?" Iroh grimaced. "Not now. No, and there's no time to check. Just get them and get everyone clear." "What about the mecha tanks?" she asked. "I'll order the biplanes to take a pass at them." What was he even saying now? Could they hit a target that small and at that speed? Sir. Evacuate and hope for the best. Miss Sato ought to be able to take at least some of them out. Or slow them down if all else failed. Kia reluctantly called in the order as Iroh put the phone down and watched. They were taking far too long. He needed to do something else. He paused, relief pouring through him as the first geyser shot into the air. They had done it. Bolin had done. His stomach felt hollow. But at what cost had the success come? More geysers followed the first, an entire battlefield covered with columns of water and a softening ground beneath. General. The radio crackled with Kia's voice. We have geysers. The mission was a success. Iroh swallowed before picking up the phone. Thank you. I can see them from here. Continue evacuation, don't forget the temperature of the water. Understood. No sooner had Iroh replaced the phone when it rang again. Zhu Li sounded worried. Sir, Captain Bolin has not emerged from his mission. Her voice lowered a little. Are we to assume he did not survive? Or is there a chance he could be still making his way up? Iroh breathed out slowly. Ruin any chances of recovering the lava bender or admit his part in Bolin's risk. He owed Bolin that much. There is always a chance he'll make it dash. So you did give him the order, Zhu Li said in an accusing tone. I gave him a choice, Iroh snapped. And I doubt the plan would have worked without him. Zhu Li, if you want to rescue him, then stay. I have faith Bolin could live through that. Stay as long as you can unless General Kia deems it unsafe. Understood, she said and ended the call. Bolin survived the palace's destruction in Ba Sing Se. He faced Kuvira in Omashu. Anyone could do that could survive this too. Iroh sighed. No point in dwelling on Bolin's fate now, if he lived, he lived. If he died, Iroh had only done what he needed to. Sir? Priority call from Point 20. Point 20. Iroh frowned as he picked up the ringing phone. Report. New airship type, the voice on the other end gasped. Preliminary sighting only, too risky to get closer. Sir, I think they have revolvers on board. Thank you. Iroh slammed the receiver down. Get me Miss Sato on the radio, he told Cheng. Asami was out of missiles, no choice now but to turn around and get a new set. She flicked on the radio. Green group, black group, and silver group, you are cleared to begin your attack. Red, blue, and gold, continue attacks. When you are out of missiles, return to base immediately for rearming. The mission had all gone well, though not without cost. Asami stared ahead, trying hard not to think that of all 6 squadrons operating the biplanes, each group was missing at least one vehicle and the associated pilot. She caught a glimpse of Iroh's airship in the distance. Probably best to keep him informed. Iroh? The next team should be here soon. I am returning to base for rearming along with the rest of the first wave. Understood, he replied in a short pause. We have confirmed 25 airships sunk. Magnificent work. He sounded pleased. Asami bit back her smile. Just doing my job. The levity did not last. People she knew and trained were now dead. She focused on the mechanical as they headed back to base. That weld on her plane was not as solid as it seemed. There were stress cracks along several areas of the fuselage. The scorching on the underside of the biplane was damaging the hull. Anything was better than remembering the explosions of the destroyed biplanes, and the lack of pilots parachuting to safety. Rearming and refueling took almost no time, and as soon as they were ready, Asami ordered all the craft to take off and head back to the conflict. Same formation, same attacks, same results. Earth disks and cables were no simple to deal with. Should the situation be this easy? Airship after airship sank to the ground and became useless. Ship after ship crashing to the ground. A new crackle on the radio made her jump. Asami. Iroh again, he did not sound as happy as before. More airships? She asked, scanning the horizon for the targets. Not hard to spot, still distant, but if they could disable them now it could only be beneficial. I see them. Moving to attack. Iroh's next words stopped her the moment before she could change the channel to call in the attack. Be careful. These are different. Preliminary reports indicate the possibility of revolver machinery on board. Asami's hands tightened on the controls. Speed against Earth disks and cables was one thing. Against something with that speed? Engage but do not take chances. Okay. Asami replied. Her chest felt tight. That's an order. Iroh hissed. Yes sir, she said and took a deep breath. She changed the radio channel. Red group, blue group, gold group, with me. X formation. Be wary of enemy fire, not likely to be cables or Earth disks. Strong possibility of revolvers. Be ready for evasive maneuvers. She licked her lips. Not common knowledge, but it might help. Current research indicates that a revolver can only fire continuously for 30 seconds without requiring a reload. If we get confirmation of revolver use, maintain evasive maneuvers for that time and try to time your strikes for the gaps. The confirmations crackled on her radio as they sped towards the new airships. Assuming the designs indicated the distinction between the types, that meant a strong possibility of 20 revolvers. Wait. The Earth Empire was no above disguising which airship was which. It would be impossible to tell which airship had which weapons until they were closer, or until they started attacking them. If they were revolver armed, taking them down became all the more important. Asami fidgeted in her seat as she sped towards her target. Something flickered from the command module below the nearest airship. Not Earth disks or cables. Asami sent her biplane up and away from where she thought the revolver spheres would cut through the air. They had not yet hit her. Just needed to keep it up a bit longer. Counting. 10 seconds. 20. 30. 40. The revolvers continued firing. They were not stopping. She must have miscounted. Captain. A panicked voice crackled over the radio. The enemy dash. He fell silent, a flicker of an explosion appearing in the distance. Asami called in for everyone to report, her voice tight. She did not want to lose any more, and to her horror so many of the pilots she checked remained silent and did not respond to her call. A huge number of losses and near constant revolver fire to deal with. Their training was useless against these weapons and this situation. Could they even hope to get close enough to take down even one of them? Her nerve failed. Best keep people alive, think of some other way to deal with their enemy. Fall back, she ordered and flicked the radio channel. Iroh? I'm recalling the squadron. We've taken heavy losses. Tears pricked her eyes and she cut herself off. They had all been aware of the risks. But it still stung worse than she might have expected. We lost 12. She took a deep breath. 12 in less than a minute. Iroh, the airship revolvers are more advanced than anticipated. Iroh did not seem to hear her. Or rather, he heard the numbers. Regroup and get back out as soon as possible. Stop those airships, he said. He did not seem to think of them as people. Just a number attributed to the squadron that was now unavailable. The remainder seemed enough for his purposes. If they make it past point 10, the infantry doesn't stand a chance. Asami's chest felt even tighter. Yes sir, she said quietly. To help others, that at least was a reason to stay even if no. Iroh had to make tough decisions. Letting personal emotions get in the way of what was necessary would not end well. Think. Maybe if she used herself as bait. She could make herself obvious in a tempting target, and while that drew revolver fire, the rest of the squadron could attack the airship tailfins. Better than nothing. Red, gold and blue leaders, I am going to distract the enemy. I want you to attack while I draw their fire. Sir Dash. Just do it, Asami said, as she sent her plane screaming towards the airship. The flicker of light indicating revolver fire appeared and she rolled the plane to one side. Just keep moving, don't move back along the same path, the revolver fire would catch her in an instant then. She wheeled, dived, spun, and somehow stayed ahead of the revolver fire. Hard to stop, even when the nearby airship leaked smoke and flames and dropped towards the battlefield. Great job guys. Asami said as she sent her biplane up as high as it would go. Hopefully out of range. Blue and gold? I want you to repeat the strategy on the other airships. Red group, we are going for a repeat performance. The plan worked at first, and splitting the group again allowed for far more bait. But even effective as it was, not all of the biplanes made it. Asami looked away from the tumbling remains of the destroyed aircraft, furiously blinking the tears out of her eyes. Despite all their successes, more airships were closing in and she was out of missiles again. She could still run, get to safety and stop risking herself. Or she could once again rearm and come back, ready to stop any more losses. Not just her pilots but everyone in the United Forces. The sky is mine, she muttered to herself. If no one else did this, they were all doomed. Nothing else for it. Asami turned back to prepare for a new attack. Korra's wounds ached, not focusing on the pain was becoming increasingly difficult. How many more spheres could Kuvira have when she had fire so many at her? Water was nowhere close to enough to slow the projectiles and they would tear through air almost without resistance. Rock and metal might work for a while, but to use those against such a master of the element seemed unwise. Could she somehow fuse all four elements into a consistent and stronger defense? An idea. The full length of a water whip should diminish the lethal potential of the spheres. The water heaved into position, each metal sphere coming alarmingly close, but always slow enough to see by the time they were almost to her. Now metal and air bending to deflect the spheres away from her. Good enough, the spheres tumbling off to either side, still fast enough to bruise but nothing close to enough force to injure or maim. A usable defense at last, though not one for anyone but her. And it was not without disadvantages, it was all she could do to maintain the three types of bending. Stopping one to lash out with a fire whip would immediately leave her vulnerable, let alone dropping everything to have enough time to lightning bend. Kuvira was unlikely to pass up the opportunity to strike her when she was defenseless. For now all she could do was to close the distance and ensure Kuvira did not have time to use her spheres. She waited for a lull in the attack and the moment Kuvira paused, Korra twisted multiple funnels of air and sent them tumbling towards her. The swirling winds were more than strong enough to force Kuvira away and to safety. But she did not look panicked or even terribly inconvenienced. Wait. There was metal below them. So much metal. Korra's pause was almost fatal. She watched, urging herself to move as Kuvira drew fragments of metal to her, the blades and spears crumbling into a glinting particles. She span on the spot and Korra knew another wave of metal spheres was heading right for her. But now she knew how to deal with them. Water whips in place, deflect the projectiles by just enough. A sphere the size of her fist ripped through the water, the defense not slowing it anywhere close to enough. It smashed into her stomach and left her struggling to breath, her lungs futilely gasping for air. Something struck her leg, adding to the agony that overrode her senses. She forced her eyes open just long enough to barely duck out of the way of yet another sphere. She was down on the ground, trying to get upright when she noticed the shadow above her, another metal sphere. No. This was something else. Metal plates fanned around her, fitting together and in a moment had enclosed her. Korra's breath echoed harshly inside the metal cavity until it contracted inwards with a grinding shriek. She could see nothing, just sense the metal under her hands, and it took all her effort just to keep the metal at arm's length. How long could she hold on like this? Too much of a target. Kuvira could shoot more spheres straight through this shell and there would be almost no way to avoid it. Avatar. Kuvira's voice sounded distant and muffled by the metal. I am honored to have had a second chance to fight with the most powerful being in the world. It is gratifying to discover my skills have exceeded hers despite her advantages. What was she planning out there? If Korra could not get free. A metal spear plunged towards her, the light bright around the puncture. It was all Korra could do to halt it at the point it pierced her skin. She took a shuddering breath. She could not waste another moment. A little more to the right and the spear would have caught her ribs. Korra grasped the metal shaft and pushed. No good, the spear did not shift at all. What now? She shrieked as pain erupted all over her body, accompanied with a sharp metallic sound. She twisted around, the pain intensifying. More spears had punctured the sphere. All the attention had been on the original. Korra took another breath and giggled. Almost literally pinned in place with an element she could not hope to exert more influence over than her opponent. But the image came to mind, she might die here looking like a pincushion. Absurd. What could she do? Far too little water in her sweat. Fire might work, but it would take more time than she had. Some air, but how much remained after her panicked panting? What about using them all together? Difficult. She would have to act without her feet in hand. If Kuvira could crush her with the sphere, she would. Korra breathed out a tiny flame, just enough to see by. Just as she expected. Try not to dwell on how much blood was on the spear hafts and on the metal. Korra took a deep breath and twisted the flame into a fire tentacle, just a narrow tendril, but with as much intensity as she could muster. Focus. Drive it into the metal. The air was growing warmer with each passing second, breathing difficult. The metal was hot and beginning to melt. Another ripple of pain rushed through her. No time to worry about that, this was her only chance to get free. The tendril reached the outside and Korra took another deep breath. The tendril widened into a fire blade, nowhere close to enough to cut through the rest of the shell, not quickly at least, but more than enough to get her enough air. The air cooled wonderfully as she drew it in through the gap, her hair whipping around her shoulders in a frenzy. The swirling twist of wind billowed all around her in the confined space and pushed against the metal walls. Not much more. How strong could it be? With a creak of tearing metal, the sphere broke apart, the shattered outer shell tossed into the distance by the howling wind. Korra tore the spikes from her body and let them fall to the ground below. She was bleeding from multiple wounds, her clothes ripped and torn, but she was still alive. Where was the avatar? Kuvira glanced around. She was not in contact with the ground, at least. The telltale pulse of the avatar's heart was nowhere. Or maybe it was and the wind was masking it. The avatar's swirling wind had not abated even after exploding the trap apart. No. Not just not abated, it was growing stronger and more intense. The roar of the wind grew louder and louder, the vortex scooping vast quantities of dust and swirling it high into the air. Switch to defensive for now. Kuvira moved the metal plates into position as the vortex swept towards her. Wind versus metal, not her element, not really. This was his element. Counting on Aang to save you. Kuvira shouted into the wind. As if in response, a spark flickered somewhere above her and the winds flowed with seemingly liquid fire. Did the avatar really think this would work? Kuvira tore open a hollow in the ground and plunged into the earth. Light was a distraction now. She did not need it to sense what was happening on the ground above her. Even if the avatar stayed airborne for a time, she would be unable to prevent putting at least one foot down. And as soon as she did, she would be Kuvira's. The sensation was confusing at first, a chunk of sense data just gone. There 1 minute and gone the next. It made sense as a few more vanished the same way. The avatar was tearing away at the ground. She must have figured out where Kuvira had gone. The avatar was impatient, no clean victory or lack of collateral damage here, she was willing to tear the landscape apart in her pursuit. The ground broke apart not far above her and in response Kuvira pushed herself further down. Whatever the avatar was doing with all that rock, it was not coming back down, that or she was throwing it as far from their conflict as necessary. No. Why would she expend effort like that? The avatar would not waste her energy so. The rock had to be up in the air above her, kept away from her. And that would be where the avatar was too. Simplistic thinking, she would not expect a surprise attack from her discards. Kuvira grinned and burrowed into the nearest heavy boulder. Then all she needed to do was wait as the rock lifted just like the rest of the debris. Focus. She could feel little beyond the wind and particles of rock smacking into and bouncing off the boulder hiding her. There was a faint sensation of movement, as if they were drifting around a central point, just as if in the wind funnel. If that was the case, then what else could be at the center of the wind, but the avatar? No way to judge where she was in relation to the avatar. Speed and surprise would be her advantage here. At Kuvira's gesture the rock shattered into dust and her metal plates formed a rotating barrier around her once more. Another second and she stabbed them forward as one coordinated attack, all the metal stabbing into the center of the wind. Kuvira frowned. There was nothing there. A bright flickered and lit up the sky. Kuvira span around in a panic. The metal plates were barely back around her and in place in time. Thankfully none had touched her, leaving her able to withstand the lightning blast as it struck her. She did not endure the experience without cost, a handful of sparks leapt from the floating metal and into her body. Her arm went numb and she found herself involuntarily clenching her teeth tight. Metal would not help with this attack. So the Avatar could lightning bend too. That changes things. Kuvira drew a number of the floating rocks around her as the Avatar blasted a new bolt at her, soon followed by others. The crackling sparks dissipated more or less harmlessly into the rock, but again not without consequence. The rock was rapidly heating up with each strike. The Avatar was not giving her the chance to rest, regroup, or re-evaluate the situation. Kuvira needed time. She needed to turn the flow of this battle back to her advantage. She needed more metal. The realization came contrary to the risk. It would not to allow the Avatar to dictate terms and make her unable to use the element she could control the best. Redirecting lightning was possible. The Fire Nation family understood that well enough. If they could redirect it, so could she. Catch it on an outlying web of metal and drive it into the ground and unable to harm her. It would work. A distraction first. The rock blasted apart as she sent herself as high as she could push. A movement caught her eye. Airships and mecha tanks. The battlefield was not far from her. Plenty of metal there. She ignored the Avatar calling her name and flew towards the conflict. No, send the airships forward, Iroh demanded into the phone. Engage the Earth Empire vessels at point-blank range. You have to ensure the survival of the ground troops. He slammed the phone down and grabbed it a second later, frantically dialing Kia's number. You have to get clear, get moving. There are airships approaching your position. You can't hope to repel an attack from them. Earth cannons and missiles against revolvers, the two methods of attack barely comparable. Iroh glowered. The technological difference between the United Forces and the Earth Empire exhibited a clear power mismatch, even with the biplanes on their side. More explosions out on the battlefield. The Earth Empire was detonating more and more smoke bombs. They must be trying to reduce visibility. It would be easy to assume the Earth Empire soldiers were bloodthirsty now. Their tactics reeked of a barbarian lack of concern. There seemed to be no consideration from the airships about injuring or killing an ally by mistake. The fire was at random and indiscriminate. Earth discs, cables, revolver fire, all shot out of the smoke, striking whatever was in its way. Iroh fumbled the radio. Red Leader, get all of your pilots out of the smoke immediately. I want them all armed and ready for a new attack. I copy, Asami replied. The United Forces airships were still drifting closer to the Earth Empire revolver-armed vessels. Wait. The Bender divisions were moving to the exterior of the ships. No. The Fire and Earth Benders might be able to deflect Earth discs and cannon fire if they caught either in time, but no one seemed capable of blocking or redirecting revolver fire. Iroh lunged for the radio as a ghostly line tore through one airship after another. He called anyway, working his way through the captains of the other craft. He might have reached one the moment before their death, but it was all too late. And now there were the metal benders to contend with, teams on the ground who shot metal cables up to grab at the United Forces airships. Some crushed the tail fins like Asami's pilots, others smashed through windows and sought the crew. Iroh, the squadron will be there in 2 minutes, Asami reported over the radio. Too long. What was happening here? Had their commander really sacrificed 50 airships to use up a good chunk of their offensive capabilities? Who could possibly think like that? Nothing like any tactic he had seen before. Airships' role was to drop bombs and devastate the ground troops, not use themselves as bait. He must be planning to break through their forces and then make an unopposed run towards Republic City. If he got there, could they really resist a call to surrender with that cost? Iroh clenched his fists. The Fire Nation army was there at least, but the cost to the civilian population. Enemy airships approaching, Cheng said. Order the rest of the fleet to form up. Block them. Iroh said, distracted. Sir, there's no one left in the West Wing. The North Wing is missing half of its total. Iroh glanced at Cheng, who pointed. Another 2 craft we lost to cables and the ghostly revolver fire. His airship was the only one still in the air at this area, and no one was attacking it. He had not hidden himself, but he had not anticipated the Earth Empire toying with him like this. Sir, they're killing those abandoning ship, someone else said nearby. Iroh stared as people leapt from a captured airship only to be flung to the ground by cables. Earth discs struck some, leaving limp bodies to float to the ground. Blasts from a revolver tore others apart. Iroh scowled. Sir. The woman fidgeted as Iroh faced her. She lifted the phone. We have received a call from someone claiming to be Baatar Jr. He wants to talk to you directly. Breathe. Calm. He would accomplish nothing by being furious now. Put him through, Iroh rumbled. You are bringing dishonor to your people, Iroh said before Baatar could speak. You shame your grandmother and dash. Is this really the time, General? Baatar sounded relaxed, like he was smiling and this was all some meaningless game. Your airships are gone, but the crews might yet survive this. If you surrender, that is. And Iroh would make a truly valuable hostage. He did not even need to consider the deal. Fine. Stop this immediately. You really are as sensible and level-headed as I keep hearing. I will honor my side of the deal. Baatar said something muffled and in a moment the attacks on the fleeing personnel halted. A temporary reprieve if nothing else. Thank you. If you would be so good as to land and surrender yourself. Give me a few moments, Iroh said glancing at the worried expressions of his bridge crew. You know where I am. I will contact you momentarily. He dialed Kia's number. I'm transferring battlefield command to you. I'm going to surrender myself. What? Why? Kia demanded. Iroh, I can't hope to dash. Yes you can, and I need to do this. I'm going to surrender, but don't think for a second I'm just going to let them take me. I plan on taking Baatar out, and if possible the Empire's command with him. The United Forces doesn't need me, I'm promoting you. He hung up as Kia tried to protest. Abandon ship. Iroh called as he tore the phone from its socket. The operatives in the control room looked blankly at him. You need me to repeat myself? Abandon ship, this is an order. Get off this ship right this instant. Cheng. General Kia is now in charge of the battle, all command has been transferred to her. Facilitate and propagate this information. She is now your commanding officer. Cheng almost protested, but soon turned to follow the others out of the bridge leaving only Yoko remaining. You should go too, Iroh said in a softer tone. My place is with you. No matter what, she replied not moving a muscle. Please. Just this one time leave me to face this alone. I am eternally grateful for your years of loyal service, but now. Iroh shook his head. I am determined to kill him, and I don't want you to get caught up in that because of me. Please, live, Iroh said quietly. Allow me my duty too, Yoko replied. And let me help you. There is no guarantee of success when you act alone. The fleet must still be downed, and you cannot run with vessel alone. Iroh held her gaze for a moment. Thank you. Enough fuel and enough bombs. Approach the lead airship slowly and await my signal. The radio crackled. All biplanes, retreat, Iroh ordered in a frantic breath. What? Asami stabbed at the transmit button with her finger. Iroh? Iroh! She cursed under her breath and flicked through the frequencies searching for his voice. What was he doing? She glanced around the battle. Iroh's airship was heading for the Earth Empire fleet. Was Iroh giving himself up for a suicide mission? Asami! Iroh roared suddenly. Retreat. This is an order. Sorry. Can't hear you, she replied and clicked the radio off. No need for goodbyes. Just like he suggested, her letters were all penned and ready. Asami settled into her seat and aimed her biplane at the airships. 6 vessels. No backup, the other biplanes had heeded Iroh's command immediately. The sky is mine. Revolver fire by was familiar now, whirling and soaring to avoid the projectiles. 3 airships down and she was still going. 2 collided as they lost control and the last floated to the ground without drama. That all you got? She yelled. A whirling vortex of water was visible in the distance. That had to be Korra. She was still okay too. Asami smiled. Her hero, her inspiration, and above all her best friend was still fighting for all she could. It was only fair that she do the same. Baatar's airship was dead ahead and she had 1 missile left, its high antennae made it a visible target among the other crafts. Heavily guarded as well. Merely disabling this airship would not be enough, she needed to destroy the bridge. Risky though, her last missile had to count for something. Asami sent the biplane into a dive as the revolvers on the airship began firing. She had to make it. Just hope the revolver fire did not come too close. The underside of the airship approached at breathtaking speed and still she waited. At almost the last moment she fired the missile and veered away. The explosion made her glance around. The airship bridge was now lost in a sea of flames. The elation was short-lived as something made a grinding noise ahead of her. With a screeching whir the propeller stopped turning. Remain calm. They had practiced this. Asami pushed the eject button. Nothing happened. She jabbed it again. Still nothing. Was it jammed? An odd sense of calm took over her as the wind picked up and her biplane gave into gravity. She tried to focus on the pictures in front of her, her mother, Team Avatar, Korra, and her, Yuzo. She had done all she could and was at least smiling when the world went cold and dark a moment later. Battle of Republic City 3. A plume of black smoke poured from the tail of Asami's biplane. Eject, Iroh hissed as the vehicle plunged towards the ground. Nothing. No pilot bursting up from the fuselage, no parachute billowing open. The biplane vanished out of sight, the smoke trail drifting in the breeze. He scowled and grabbed the phone. Lieutenant Ginkgo? Captain Sato is now missing in action. I am promoting you to captain, continue the mission. You have discretion on all tactics. Commander Batar of the opposition is dead and I am authorizing you to go to a full offensive strike. He hung up. He could not think about her now. How the best pilot and the one person on their side who truly understood the revolvers was gone. But what a final achievement! The death of Batar Jr. signaled an enormous blow to the Earth Empire. Their commander was gone. Only a few of the revolver airships remained in the air, the numbers nowhere close to enough to stop the biplane division. Iroh paused. His fingers tangled in the chain of Asami's locket. The biplanes must be reaching their limits at this rate. All of them proved themselves a remarkable success, the successful completion of their mission imminent. As soon as the airships were down, they could perform scouting duties. Iroh shook himself, still giving orders. Best to report into the commander. He picked up the phone again. Kia? Batar Jr. is dead. For someone surrendering you talk a lot, Kia replied. Iroh smiled. Maybe you can take charge again. I may do. For now, Iroh said. Take advantage of the change. Attack while you can. He clicked the phone and called yet another number. How is the volcano? It's still heating up, but the firebenders have more or less got it under control. Sir? Did you really send Zuko and Dash? Never mind. Ask them to keep on it. He moved to the radio. All remaining airships, attack. Ahead the airships seemed to move without pattern, presumably now thrown into chaos with Batar's death. Another explosion. Earth Empire airships were now apparently resorting to mutually assured destruction and smashing their own crafts into the united forces. Pointless, it was nothing more than a delaying tactic now. A competent commander would regain control of the skies within an hour. Thank you, Asami, he said, his fingers tightening on the locket. More reports came in over the radio. 100 dead at point 6 and 300 at point 3. Iroh ordered the infantry at point 10 to maintain their position. What remained of the south wing was moving into the vicinity as reinforcements, at about the same as the second wave of biplanes arrived. Helpful, but it was unlikely to be enough. Another phone call. General Vera. Report. Iroh. My troops have pushed through points 15 to 18. They've begun attacking the Empire from behind, Vera replied. Excellent. Ensure your men are destroying any reserve weaponry as directed, Iroh said, noting an indicator. Someone else was calling him. He switched lines. The revolver airships have commenced attacking the battleships. General Fei sounded tense. Combination of bombs and sphere attacks. We've lost one ship, it went down with all hands. Iroh stared towards the distant lake. Are the airships within range of the water cannons? Affirmative, Fei replied. But Dash. Switch them to oil and fire immediately, Iroh ordered. A pause. Switching now. Commencing firing. A plume of fire roared into the air distantly, more explosions bursting into life in the air. 13 enemy airships destroyed. Status of the battleships. Iroh asked. No more losses. Wait, revolver airships are withdrawing. Iroh held his breath for a moment. Shoot them down. They're too dangerous to stay loose. Earthbenders attacking waterbenders on water, they were never going to win, lured in by the presence of the battleships. Acknowledged. Iroh slammed the phone down and dialed a new number. Likha. Iroh. We are experiencing a new offensive from the Earth Empire stretching between Point 3 and Point 6. They're advancing and we can't do much to slow them down, Likha yelled above the sounds of combat. Iroh scowled. Nothing more he could really do. Success would come down to sheer numbers at this point, and the revolvers had made a significant difference to the Empire's chances. While the biplanes had saved them from almost certain destruction, what ultimately had the cost been? Asami. The geysers had left the revolver mecha tanks floundering at the cost of Bolin. Likha, excuse me, another call? He barely paused. Iroh, he answered. Major Chai, sir. Requesting evacuation. We are at Point 3 and we're pinned down, a panicked voice replied. Iroh stared from the window. Point 3 was a bloody mess now. Hang on for now. Was there anything he could do? Trapped between the volcano and the approaching army. Sending anyone there to help would only risk more lives. Sir, if evacuation is impossible, please just tell me, Chai said. The commanding officers are willing to fight to the last man. The lower ranks have been ordered to begin tunneling to safety. Iroh was silent, unable to articulate an answer. I see. Thank you for your friendship, Iroh. She disconnected the line. Iroh took a deep breath, ignoring the trembling in his hands, and dialed a new number. Bumi. He asked. Update. We're pinned down. There's more revolvers approaching us as we speak. Hang on for 10 more minutes. I've sent some of the fleet your way. He switched the call. Zuli? Where are you? We're holding position at the cavern entrance. Bolin still hasn't come out, Zuli replied. Never mind him. Get out of there before you get caught in the crossfire, Iroh said. Iroh. Opal's voice came over the line. We're not leaving until he's safe. The line went dead. Another refusing to obey orders, likely to wind up dead as well, just like Asami. A siren whirred into life. Iroh? We've been boarded, Yoko said. Bolin braced himself as best he could while the rock and earth tore apart all around him. Nothing he could do but keep what had been the ceiling from crushing him, and with any spare effort slowly hold the rock around him in shape. Just had to wait for the rumbling to stop. Assuming it would. His forehead throbbed from a large section of rock he deflected just a little too late. His whole body ached. Was he bleeding? He could feel moisture, but blood or sweat was impossible to tell in the dark. His ears pulsed with a continuous buzzing, and even shuffling into a more comfortable position was almost more effort than he could manage. Standing would not be easy if it were possible at all. He smiled at the poor joke. As if he could stand up in this tiny space. The earthquake slowly subsided, the rock and earth settling around him. Finally. Another burst of earth bending to keep this tiny refuge from falling on top of him, and it was time to make a move. But which way? He had no idea where he had been heading. The ground shuddered again. Bolin held his breath as everything trembled around him. He grit his teeth and held on as the earth settled once more, a fresh wave of nausea flowing over him. Where was the other tunnel? He had to get moving. But something was wrong. He shifted his hands, the rough rock clear against his skin, catching himself on something sharp made he wince. He could still feel. But it was as if he had never learned seismic sense. There was nothing more he could feel. Bolin slammed his hand against the rock and waited for the reverberations. Nothing. No. Not nothing, too much. Far too much. The ground was still shuddering, it had never stopped. Not the violent shaking of the quake, but rather a continuous quiver, enough to render his enhanced senses useless. Trapped in the dark and completely lost. Completely cut off. Bolin sighed. No choice then, he had to just dig up. Just like basing se, keep on going, find water, or air, or both. Turning himself over was exhausting. He took a moment to let his head settle. His arms felt weak as he reached out to claw at the rock and start digging. Crawling was difficult, he kept falling to the side. After a while he stopped resisting, something to lean on did at least help. Bolin took shuddering breath after shuddering breath and forced the earth open ahead of him. At least his knees seemed less injured than the rest of him. He could scramble forward resting on them for now. Just needed to keep moving upwards. If he could somehow find the tunnels Zuli and Opal helped them start, he could get back to the surface. After an eternity, Bolin paused in his digging. The temperature was beginning to rise. Lava? Horrifyingly possible. He had to hurry. Korra was waiting for him. Hard to breath now. His feet were in agony, a twinging pain sent shocks through his torso every time he stretched too far. He fumbled at his collar, resting all his weight against the wall as the world span around him. Earth was too weak, too soft, too prone to manipulation by others. Metal was the superior substance, malleable, dependable, hers. There was no metal bender stronger than her now. Let Toph come. She would see how vast the differences in their abilities were. But only if she had enough. Wait. There was metal nearby, the armies could spare her a little. No. Why stop there? They could spare it all, she would deal with the remainder later. Ahead of her airships slammed against each other, metal fell in showers of fire and debris. She could not see Batar's airship anywhere. Was it one of the many that lay damaged but intact on the ground, or one of the ones that was nothing but twisted metal and smoke? Hard to worry right now. Curious other craft in the skies, small crafts moving at what felt like a blur zipped through the skies like buzzing insects. Kuvira. A voice roared behind her. Kuvira turned, the avatar was following her, propelled on a pulsing streak of flame. Disappointing, the avatar should prepare for their next battle. And susceptible to demonstrations of power. Kuvira gestured at the nearest buzzing craft and tore it from the air. There was a person inside, a woman. She stared at Kuvira with rising panic, and then suddenly she was flying up and into the air. A heavy piece of fabric unfurled and caught the air as the woman slowly descended to the ground. Kuvira scowled and crushed the vehicle in on itself. The resulting mass of warped metal made a decent projectile to hurl towards the avatar. She caught it easily enough and flung the wreckage away from her. The avatar was using air, a mass flow of air that did not seem to be abating. The wind tore at her clothes and dragged her forward. A fire sword appeared in the avatar's hand. Kuvira smirked, her movements left her opponent worried. Why else would she be resorting to such direct attacks? Presumably she wished to save her friends and comrades. Kuvira glanced at the conflict. Too high and too distant to spot one of them. To make the avatar see the light go out of their eyes. Pity. The metal burst her from the air currents in a matter of moments. Kuvira, stop. This is between us. Korra yelled. It still is, Kuvira replied. She needed as much as she could get. Kuvira grabbed it all from her army, pulling it up into the air, breaking it down and splitting it down into a cloud of metal spheres and blades. She would lead them forwards to victory, and use it better than they ever could. So much metal, more than she had ever had in her life. There was a change in the air, looked like someone had noticed them above the battlefield. The airships were beginning to pull away. Not so fast, there was metal in those craft too. Kuvira reached out to draw General Yoon's airship towards her. The massive craft blotted out the sun as she drew it towards her. The creak of the metal bending was like her favorite melody. How would the avatar deal with this projectile? She shoved it towards her opponent, the avatar bringing up her arms to guard against impact. Was the explosion her doing, or an inevitable consequence of the impact? No matter. Two of those annoying, buzzing craft fired some kind of metal cylinder at her. Curious, and weak. Easy to deflect. Let the avatar deal with these two. Both cylinders exploded into flame and smoke, much like the airship but more potent despite their limited volume. A blast of wind whipped through the fire. The cylinders had not touched the avatar. At least the fight would not be over too fast. A few sheets of metal to defend herself, but the wind was quickly proving more powerful than she could cope with. The gale tore at her as the air seemed to curl in on itself. She was forming another funnel. All the metal she had would not prevent the wind tossing her this way and that. The ground would be a shield. Kuvira plunged towards the ground, the earth gaping open ahead of her. She sealed the aperture behind her and burrowed beneath the ground. Now up, and into the heart of the battle. Yoko shoved another equipment case against the cabin door as something slammed into the other side. All they could do was hope to delay the inevitable, and put as much between them and their attackers as possible. "General!" A familiar voice yelled over the radio. He blanked on the scientist's name. "Not important right now. The mountain is extremely unstable. To stop an entire volcano, impossible or as close to as made no odds. Even Avatar Roku had difficulty dealing with such a problem. The firebenders could try, but that would likely result in more lives sacrificed over nothing if they could not contain the threat. Get out of there," he yelled into the microphone. "Evacuate the area. Immediately. Iroh. Zuko." His grandfather's voice was grim. "We're not giving up yet, me or your great aunt. If that ash reaches the Fire Nation Azula was muttering. "An explosion at this stage is inevitable, but I am certain we can delay it. We will not let Zuko cut in." Grandfather the sound of shearing metal stopped him before he could say anything more, the babble over the radio unimportant compared to the broken door. A brief glimpse of uniformed men and women before they surged forward. Kenpais, Kuvira's personal guard, sent to kill him and do what she had failed to do last time. The assassins forced their way into the room in a heartbeat, a large cylinder clattering across the floor just ahead of them. It lay still for little more than a moment before it began spewing some form of gas. Flammable, no doubt, intended to keep him from firebending. Or were they hoping he would sacrifice himself along with taking their lives? As if he would give up so easily, there was no way he could die like this. Yoko drew her sword as she backed up, putting space between her and the intruders. The blade was solid platinum, no way to turn that back against her. Iroh fumbled the pearl-handled dagger from his belt. Shorter reach, but he had practiced so very hard. Metal benders still presented some unique problems with hand-to-hand combat. The Kenpai tried cables first. No doubt they wished to simply restrain him and hand him to Baatar if he had lived, or to Kuvira. Was she capable of torture now? To watch someone suffer and take pleasure in it? He had no wish to find out. Yoko bent the metal cables away from her and Iroh. The attacks buried themselves into equipment and bulkheads. Iroh sidestepped a second shot, snagging the cable with his fingers. A simple movement to wrap it around his hand and heave. Maybe Kenpais were not the pinnacle of the Earth Empire after all. The assassin stumbled forward, one quick swipe and she fell to the floor, fingers clutching her neck and far too late to stop the inevitable. Perhaps they represented the Earth Empire very well, a show of force, competency visible, but the majority no real threat. And yet, even now he had underestimated them. The first depth now presented a tripping hazard on the cabin floor. Pay more attention. 4 of the 10 agents gestured to the walls and floor, it curled inwards at their movements. Were they going to use the whole cabin against him? Kunao, some from him, some from Yoko. All platinum, all unstoppable at the speed they threw them. 4 soft impacts and associated wheezing exhaled breaths. 5 assassins dead now and 5 more to deal with. Concern crossed the remaining faces. Was the Fire Nation prince supposed to be an easy kill? 10 assassins seemed like they expected some difficulty, though not this. Iroh managed to catch another's neck and that left 4. Yoko's blade shone and arced through the air without the slightest resistance. 3 to go. Yoko claimed another life. And stopped. His companion swallowed hastily and reached to touch the blade now protruding from her torso. Her mouth moved but no sound emerged. The blade vanished and Yoko collapsed a moment later. Iroh lashed out at the assassin standing over her. That left just 1. Wait. He had lost sight of her somehow. Something heavy and cold touched his throat and tightened. He gasped for breath frantically. The Great Uniter thinks the world has no more use for you, a voice muttered behind him as the pressure intensified. Iroha's hands scrabbled at his throat. Could not let it end like this. The pressure on his neck was growing ever stronger and each of his breaths was becoming weaker. Think. No way to reason. He tried to reach the body behind him, his fumbling grip touching something, but his grip was far too weak to do anything of use. No way to lightning bend now. The voice asked mockingly. She was right about you. Goodbye, General. One chance and one chance only. Iroha gasped another breath and threw himself backwards as hard as he could. The assassin moved with him and he kept moving. Had to go faster. The wall could not be far, could it? There was a groan behind him as they hit something, the impact jolting Iroha. In the same moment something cracked. A momentary loss of pressure at his throat, but it returned with renewed force a moment later. Had to make this next one count. Iroha staggered forward and ran backwards as fast as he could. Another splintering crack, the assassin's footing gone. They tipped suddenly. They were weightless, the air billowing around them. Now was his chance. She was not using her cable to save herself. Why? Was she intending to die with him? The movement had loosened her grip a little, it should be enough. Iroha twisted around and caught a glimpse of the woman's furious face. I'm not out yet, he growled. He pushed and ducked his head under her loop of cable. Something seared into his shoulder, a flow of blood arcing from him to the knife the assassin held. Their eyes met for a fraction of a moment before Iroha bent flame jets to break his fall. The assassin dropped away from him, never looking away from his gaze, or he hers. Staying airborne was difficult. His chest wheezed, his shoulder throbbed. And someone else died in his place, died that he might keep on going. He landed awkwardly beside the assassin's body a moment later, swaying as he tried to center himself. Where was his airship? Difficult to see in the cluttered, chaotic skies. Weapons, vehicles, and even whole biplanes were spinning in the air, rushing towards a central mass of metal, a whirling vortex of spinning metal. A towering tornado of lethal edges, but far taller and wider than any whirlwind. Around it a blue blur moved in the air. Korra. Then Kuvira must be in the center of that mass. He shook his head. The power the two wielded, the sheer force each seemed to be able to use. What must it be like to face an avatar in combat? How could anyone hope to win? What had gone through Oze's mind as he faced Aang all those years ago? Had the knowledge Aang was not fully realized given him confidence enough? No. Iroha shook his head. His great-grandfather would have challenged Aang no matter the situation. If Kuvira had been this powerful when she challenged him, he would not be standing here. Yoko the Kyoshi warrior was dead, he was away from his command. He needed to get to a radio and fast. There, a command post not too far away. Closer with flame jets take into consideration. He pushed himself into the air, skimming fast along the ground. Something vast exploded in the distance, the disturbance seeming to split the air. The reverberation knocked him from the sky. He scrambled to his feet and stared in horror. Mount Chenbai was gone and in its place was a rising plume of black smoke. Zuko. Auntie. They had been there. No. Time for that later. He had a job to do first. The heat was really beginning to sap his strength. How far had he come now? No way to tell, no way to see, no way to feel. Nothing he could possibly do but continue digging onwards and upwards. His head was spinning again. Could not let that stop him, could not let it slow him. Had to keep digging. Keep moving up, keep moving away from where he had been. He paused for a second and pushed on. Interesting. Something had changed in the ground, he could feel the movements of his hands through rock again. Whatever had wiped out the sense before seemed to have faded. It helped a little, and as tiny as it was, he seized on it. There was a far greater sense of progression than before. Some other sensation above him. Vague but a good place to aim for whatever it was. A person, a mecha tank, water. Water would help. Keep on going. He licked his lips, his mouth painfully dry. He pushed his hands up and into a void. It was still near darkness here. He was not on the surface, just in a tunnel some distance below the ground. Felt like the crystal layer. Bolin smiled. A fitting place to wind up. If he died here, he would be just like Mako, laid out in a beautiful tomb just like he had been. He could rest here and let time take its course. No. He could not just give up so easily. There was a way up, a way out, it had to still be there. He just needed to find it. Something sparkled and arced in the air. Pretty. It looked a lot like a firefly. Just like the ones in the swamp. Wait. A firefly down here? That had to be all but impossible. Bolin paused and stared at the dancing light. Incongruous, improbable, but definitely there. A moving object down in the depths with him. And as good a destination as any he could choose from right now. Bolin crawled towards it, still convinced that he would feel the heat of the lava on his heels any second. The fluttering firefly was getting lower and lower. There was some kind of growth from it, a thick strand that rose up into the darkness. What an odd creature he had found. Shame there was no one to tell about it. Bolin blinked, the shape making sense in the jumbled mush of his head. A crystal suspended on a cable. Not a firefly. A cable. A way out. He grabbed at the cable and heaved himself to his feet. Wrapping the wire around himself took forever, and tugging on it made him feel on the verge of collapse. Now to see if there was anyone on the other end, the cable tugged back, and now strained against him. He staggered forward with it, blinking at the distant light at the top of the passage down here. No way he could climb that. The cable pulled him onto tiptoe and with a wrench lifted him clear of the ground. Still slow going, Bolin grabbed at anything he could, trying to haul himself up higher and higher. The light above him grew steadily larger and brighter. It was near dazzling as sound reached him. The tasted better than anything he had ever seen. Wind ruffled his hair as he shut his eyes against the glare. Someone was hugging him. Someone's. Bolin. Opal. That sounded a lot like Opal. We need help with him. Another voice called. Zuli, maybe. Get a healer over here. The voices were too loud, each word a new splintering pain in his head. I'll be okay, Bolin rasped with his eyes closed, concentrating on his breathing. Just need a bit of water. He needed to know what had happened. How long had he been down there? He risked opening his eyes, the light painful but bearable. Dead bodies nearby, smoke and fire. Something moving distantly in the sky, looked like two figures. Korra and Kavira? Too far away to tell. He winced as a chunk of metal landed alarmingly close. The horrifying sound of revolver fire came from close by. Bolin tried to move, but Zuli and Opal lay across him before he could even begin crawling. I'm sorry, he murmured. No. It's not your fault. The mission went fine. Another blast of revolver fire cut her off. The geysers got almost all of them, Zuli added. You saved our lives, and so many more. Without the geysers. She shook her head. Bolin nodded, took a deep breath and heaved a few earth walls into position. Not much, but hopefully enough to shield them for now. We should get him to the truck. The two girls awkwardly shifted him into the equipment truck, his legs refusing to keep pace with them. He waved them away as soon as he was sitting down and lay on his back as they both clambered into the front. The truck began moving the moment a revolver mecha tank slammed into the first of Bolin's shields and destroyed it completely. The truck sped before the revolver fire could catch them, just one hit might be the end of them. Bolin could not look away from the terrifying machine, forever grateful when a rocky outcrop hid it from view. They could outrun the slower mecha tanks for a while, but what then? You okay? Opal yelled from behind him. I'm okay, he replied. Not entirely true. His head ached and his ears rang. I'm going to get us some shelter, Zuli said. There's a rock formation ahead. Looks like a decent place to regroup. Great minds think alike, Opal commented. Bolin pushed himself up enough to stare out the back of the truck. A mass of rock rose up on the left, and to either side of them they passed little clusters of United Forces and even Earth Empire personnel. All here together to avoid the revolvers. Bolin dragged himself to the end of the truck as it slowed and somehow heaved himself into a sitting position. The lava bender, an Earth Empire solider, said, staring at Bolin. She cleared her throat. I saw you at Omashu. You were right. The woman hung her head. I just wanted to save Korra, Bolin replied. But I want to save everyone now. The revolvers, how do we stop them? I don't know, the woman said, wincing at the name. We never knew they existed. Bolin nodded slowly. He could feel enough to be certain she was telling the truth. Captain. A familiar voice said. General Bumi, Bolin smiled and winced as he tried to salute, the Earth Empire woman slouching away from the group. Wing. Way. Opal shouted and grabbed her nearby brothers. Bumi smiled for a moment and then his expression became sterner. Save it for later, he said. If we don't do something about the revolvers, we're as good as dead. No way we can get clear of here without them noticing us. We are hoping they'll run short of spheres before long, they might be slow but they'll get here eventually. Assuming they don't disintegrate the rock first. A disheveled Solider ran up to Bumi. Sir? She's in critical condition. Bumi swore. Excuse me. He rushed off, leaving the others in his wake. Zuli started after him. Zuli. Opal asked. I have an idea. But we will need his help. And Bolin's, she said. Not sure how much good I can do. Bolin replied. I believe in you, Zuli said simply. Her words made Bolin smile for a moment and he got to his feet, almost falling over. Wei grabbed his arm and kept him upright as they followed Bumi. He crouched beside a pale-looking Earth Empire woman. No. A girl. Her uniform was dark with blood and her breathing was shallow. She's not got long left, Bumi said in a soft voice as he stood. Sir Bolin started. The girl's eyes blinked open and she stared at him. And smiled. Captain Bolin. Hi. He tried. Big fan of yours, she wheezed. Watched you. A lot of us watched you. She shook her head. But forbidden. Did it anyway. Sorry, she said as her eyelids drooped. Bolin took a painful step forward and slumped to the ground beside her. Hundreds of questions. Did she believe in Kuvira's cause or needed to live? His head radiated pain again. The girl's chest had not moved since her eyes shut. He reached for her dog tags. Njiti, he read. Nothing in her pockets but a photography and a letter. He pushed into his pocket. Zuli cleared her throat and raised her hand. Sir? I believe I have a plan. Bumi stared at her for a moment. Yes? Come on lass. Out with it. Uncle. Opal snapped. We don't have time for niceties, Bumi retorted. I'll apologize later. It's fine, Zuli said, pushing her glasses higher up her nose. But I am not sure it will work, we would require Bolin's lava-bending proficiency. All eyes turned to him. Bolin sat up straighter, trying to fix his expression to not expose the agony he was in. As long as someone can help me get around, I reckon I can still help, he croaked. He coughed and tried to soothe his voice. Bumi frowned. So your plan is a lava bender? Hate to say it, but those things are platinum. Not even lava can get through the hulls. Indeed, Zuli said. But even if they are platinum, that means they are still made to metal. And metal has a tendency to conduct heat. If Bolin can land a hit on the engines with his lava, he should be able to make them overheat. It won't stop the weapon systems admittedly, but it will ensure they can't go anywhere, or come after us. Bumi was quiet for a moment. About the best we've got, he mused. We would need some distractions though. He grinned. Though I've been told I can be very distracting. I'll volunteer to keep Bolin safe, Wei said. I thought you had a boyfriend. Wei covered Bolin's mouth with his hand. The revolvers were still a good distance away, and it seemed the rest of the Mecha Tank Division were content to simply let the revolvers take care of destroying the sheltering survivors. Bumi and Wing headed out first, Wing digging a shallow trench into the battlefield to hide their movement. They arced around behind one of the currently stationary Mecha Tank Divisions and vanished out of sight. If all went to plan, Wing should be able to pry one of the cockpits open and let Bumi slip inside. Second after worried second passed until to any observers allied with the Earth Empire, what happened next would never cease to be surreal. A seemingly normal and nondescript mecha tank abruptly started shot flames, cables and then began colliding with other mecha tanks. Angry and wary shouts soon became audible along with accusations of treachery. For a long while nothing happened, the revolvers still advanced. "Get ready to run," Opal breathed. It would do them little good. Even if they started now, the revolvers halted and turned back the way they came. A few opened fire towards the errant mecha tank. Fortunately, Bumi's crazed handling of the vehicle was far too swift for them. "All eyes are on Bumi," Zuli said over the radio. "Bolin and Wei? You're up." Wei helped Bolin to his feet, the world tilting around him. This was a bad idea. But they needed him. No one else could help in his place. He grit his teeth and forced one foot in front of another to keep pace with Wei. He limped behind the revolvers, Wei struggling to keep him on his feet. "You don't have to do this," Wei said as Bolin closed his eyes, waiting for the dizziness to subside. "I do," Bolin said as he took a shuddering breath. "I have to. If I don't dash." He stopped his head mid-shake, even that tiny motion almost enough to send him crashing to the floor. Another breath, he pulled rock from the ground and formed it into a lava shuriken. Just lifting the whirling lava and sending it hurtling towards the revolver seemed to take all his strength. At least his aim was good. The lava splattered across the very section Zuli said the engine would be. Nothing happened. The lava dripped off the revolver, hissing as it hit the ground, bursts of smoke drifting up into the air, and the machine kept on going. "I must have missed dash." She said it would take time. "Look, there's still some lava on there," Wei said, pointing. "You don't look so good. Maybe we should dash." "I have to get the others," Bolin interrupted. "It's not far to the next." "Two more approaching from northwest," Zuli said. "Thanks," Wei said, glancing in the directed indication. He looked back towards their hiding place and frowned. "Keep your head down. You need to be more careful." Bolin wanted to echo his words, but it took all he had to produce another 2 lava shurikens. And if this was going to work, that was 2 more revolvers with overheating engines. "The first mecha tank has stalled," Opal shouted over the radio. "The plan is working. I repeat, the plan is working." The group cheered, Wei grinning at him. Bolin shot him a weak smile, but his head pulsed with renewed. He clutched his skull, hastily snatching his hand away when Wei glanced at him. "You need to sit down." Bolin shook his head, almost regretting the motion again. He gestured ahead to the next revolvers and gritted his teeth as they approached. How many more lava shurikens could he hope to make? The Dasha mecha tanks lay in awkward angles, trapped in deep mud. Not easy to fix. Even now her influence over Platinum was effectively nothing. Kuvira stopped and stared at the vehicles. The hatches had been flung open and the cockpits were empty. Cowards. Defeated by nothing more than water? Pathetic. The most useless of the operators were already dead nearby, reddened, dead bodies slumped on the ground and in the mud. There should be others to take their places. Where were they? Fleeing from the battle. Her troops were withdrawing, running scared from the meager force of the united forces. Anger filled her belly. Kuvira lifted herself into the sky and shot ahead of the scurrying troops and dropped to the ground. "Turn and attack," she demanded. Kuvira ignored the pain riddling her body. She swiped at the sweat on her face, confused when her hand came away red. No matter. They must not see any weakness in her. What good will it do? Neru demanded. How far had loyalties shifted that someone like Neru, who cowered at her every word, objected to her orders? We have twice their numbers and technological superiority. Kuvira sneered at her. That this battle has taken as long as it has can only be due to your incompetence. What do you know about the battle? Neru shouted. The Lano regiment was wiped out by the United Forces battleships. More than half of our supplies were lost with the Yin camp. You weren't here. You don't know what happened. Great Uniter, Xian interrupted, shooting a glance at Neru. 90% of the Dasha mecha tanks were incapacitated thanks to the geysers. It was a trap we did not anticipate. He gulped. In addition, 3 battalions have been lost in the Chenbei division. Where is Commander Batar? Kuvira demanded. Dead, sir, Xian replied. Kuvira said nothing. They wanted to pity her and sympathize she had lost. What did they think her relationship to Batar was again? A lover? Ah, poor Kuvira, weakened by the loss of her lover. As if that could weaken her. You must understand, the United Forces is more organized and experienced. You lead us before, but you didn't lead us here. All you wanted was to kill the Avatar. Nehru broke off at Xian's urgent gesture. We can save what forces we have left. If we retreat we can regroup and regain our strength. Staying here is suicide, the volcano is unstable. If we stay so be it. Die for the cause, Kuvira interrupted. Would you be willing to do the same? Nehru shot back. Of course, Kuvira said, drawing herself up. I have always been willing to give my life for the Empire. I would do anything for our cause, I am unimportant. I would discard my past, my future. My friends and family mean nothing. Everything has been for this. Only now was it clear how true it was. The one known as Kuvira, who had once been friends with the Avatar, was no more. The Earth Empire is more than you. Nehru yelled. We were fighting for the people. The soldiers aren't just bait to be cut down when they weren't needed. Kuvira cocked her head to one side. You dare defy me? Yes. Nehru screamed. Kill me if that helps. I've done so much harm for the good of the Empire, so many horrible things. But I did them because I believed in the dream and that of a better future. But now she gestured around the battlefield. It's all been for nothing. We will fail due to your arrogance. The Empire will collapse but the people will live on. Even if you don't. After giving it some thought, your death might help, Kuvira said and bent Nehru's armor inward. She fell forward leaking blood with a horrible creaking snap. Anyone else feel they wish to volunteer? Avenge the general? Xian said as he drew his sword. Defy the great uniter. Heartbeats as loud as a march, whether fear or anger it mattered little. Many took up Xian's cry and they came at her in a rush. So many voices chanting his words over and over again. Freedom for the Earth Empire. Sounded amongst them. Those still loyal formed up to guard their leader, as they should. Earth Empire fought Earth Empire. But to experience such treachery. How could they abandon her like that? The Earth Empire was hers alone. She created it and would therefore rule it. She alone could see the starting points to a great nation, how the sacrifices and strife now would pay off in later life. No one else could see so far ahead. Not one else had her vision. The fighting was becoming tedious. Kuvira tore the metal swords from everyone present and gave them back point first, blades slicing through soldiers without pause. It was not even worth separating the loyal from the traitors. They were all weak. All expendable. They could not lose. She did not need them, not really. They had been, were nothing without her. Fear would be enough in future, to ensure the people bowed and scraped as needed. Kuvira seized the fallen Earth Empire flag and planted it into the ground. Her dream was still possible, one nation united and unstoppable, powerful beyond measure, superior to all others. No. The Empire as she had made it was too small and this body was not enough. The Earth Empire needed rebirth as did the merged host and spirit. Let this battle be marked in the pages of history as the moment of rebirth. Kuvira shouted. The generation following us will learn from our sacrifices as they strive towards a better future. And I will be there to lead them, as I will always be. No cheers accompanied her words now, instead the ground roared beneath her as the air rang with distant battle. Chaos. Almost endless chaos. For a moment she saw herself on a glinting blade. Vato's mark glowed deep inside her. Absolute power was the key, the failure so far was not in using everything she had. Something shifted and it was like the heavens poured down on top of her. The planet was tangible, more rock and metal than she had ever felt before. It stretched from the mountain peak of Chenbai to the very center of the world. There was no analog, nothing to compare this sensation to. The world span about its core and it was then Kuvira realized her destiny. Her destiny was, had always been, to wield this power. And as she moved her hands, the earth's plates shifted with them, the resulting quake hurling the ground troops off their feet. Republic City was close to the edge of a plate. Just moving it like this should decimate the city. Lava stirred and shifted under the Chenbai Mountains, months of careful manipulation at last paying off. What if the lava burst into the sky in a plume of smoke and flames? Excellent. Not enough, but getting there. What was taking so long? It should have simply exploded and buried Republic City in ash. Well, more direct intervention was necessary. She headed for the mountain. At least the pilots had parachutes. Was Asami amongst the surviving pilots? Tempting to watch, to check. Korra looked away. She could not afford to worry about her friend right now. Kuvira was still her priority. Below her the battlefield rippled and shifted, sending plumes of dust into the air. A quake, larger than she had seen before. Kuvira was at the epicenter of the quake, her eyes glowing red, metal swirling around her. She was staring at Republic City. The air shifted and Vato's power flared across the landscape with a surge, wave after wave of sensation crashing over her. How could he be so strong? Was this harmonic convergence? The power of the cosmos directed to destroying the very land beneath their feet? Korra rushed to the ground, Kuvira seemingly taking no notice of her, dead bodies surrounding her, her gaze drawn to every fleeing form. Korra blinked. They could not be, they were. Kuvira was killing her own troops, pools of blood all around them. She had to strike now. Remember the movements, remember the training. Draw on the power of the cosmos, just as Vato was. Korra thrust her fingers forward and the spark exploded away from her on her first try. The bolt of lightning, slower but still as potent, streaked across the landscape straight at Kuvira. Her opponent did not react, content to continue striking and aiming at any other moving target. It would be over soon. The spark crackled and then caught on the metal spinning. It flickered and crackled from one floating chunk of debris to another, remaining at the periphery and never even coming close to the target. Kuvira was smiling. Korra growled and unleashed another spark. Same outcome, the metal catching the bolt and eliminating its deadly potential. The ground heaved below her as the quake intensified. Kuvira. Stop this. You'll kill everyone. Korra shouted. No reply. What about your army? Kuvira, stop this nonsense. Nonsense. Kuvira glanced at her. Far from nonsense. This is all necessary, Avatar. Before we can begin rebirth, all must be destroyed. Kuvira yelled over the cacophony. Lightning was not going to work, she would need to fall back on the other elements. Korra twisted the air into a new cyclone and sent it whirling towards Kuvira. The wind burst against rock pillars suddenly between her and her opponent, she was becoming more and more powerful. Korra caught a glimpse of her before the rock hit her, Kuvira with her head thrown back, her gleeful laugh audible above everything else in a torrent of metal tumbling through the air around her. The hatch on the first revolver popped open awkwardly and the pilot scrambled out, desperately pulling at buckles and straps as he tumbled to the ground. He had hung on longer than Bolin expected, the pilot's clothes now dripping with sweat. Loyalty? Bolin shook his head. The first pilot was soon followed by the other revolver operators. Spirits were high in Bumi's group as he guided his captured mecha tank back to the group. People were cheering and excited. Once he would have joined in, right now Bolin needed to rest. Sleep sounded pretty good. Guess we need to get back. Bumi began. There was something wrong with the ground. No. The air? An invisible force tugged at Bolin, threatening to pull him forward. He resisted for a moment, the tug becoming stronger and stronger. He took a faltering step forward as Wei tightened his grip, an earth cone now anchoring the both of them. The strange gravity increased still further. The sound of fabric tearing filled the air and Bolin frowned as the metal buttons of his uniform tore free and sailed away from him. There should not be anything enough metal to bend them, and from such a distance. But someone was. He glanced around hurriedly, others confused and with uniforms damaged and torn. The force dragged a few people along the ground, desperately looking for handholds. They lifted a short distance into the sky before their clothes could no longer support them and they crashed back to earth. With a creak of metal, the revolver weaponry nearby splintered and split, hundreds of thousands of metal spheres streaking up into the sky like a cloud. Pilots scrambled free from mecha tanks as sections of harness and internal wiring tore free. A swirling vortex of metal was forming above the battlefield, the sky changing color as the ground shook again. Fire had heated metal to brilliant reds, oranges, and yellows, while the ice froze others into glinting blues. The resulting maelstrom of color was beautiful and terrifying as red lightning from the volcano split the sky. "Bolin! Way!" Bumi shouted to them. "We're getting out of here." A thunderous explosion split the air, the flash of light leaving Bolin dazzled for a moment. The volcano, the whistling sound made him look up. Huge chunks of flaming, lava-coated rock were plummeting onto the battlefield. But there was rain too. It felt cool on Bolin's skin. Rain and fire falling together, the sun and moon both visible in the sky. Dark clouds smashed into white clouds in the sky. The freezing cold chilled his bones while his skin burned with the nearby flames. Then the rain stopped. Bolin stared at the suspended water droplets, and before he could react, the water rushed back into the sky and into that same vortex. Fire and metal and water. The ground splintered and cracked all around him. There was lava not far down, worryingly close to the surface here. The cracking ground continued, small groups winding up on tiny sections separated by far too much space, and a not-so-long drop into lava below. Opal and Zuli stayed close to him. Bumi, Wing, Wei, and the others were some distance now, the gaps widening between them. "Get to the airships!" Bumi yelled as the ground shook. No way to follow them. Bolin bent a hasty rock bridge to get him, Zuli and Opal to more solid ground. There must be more metal orbiting Kuvira than in the entire rest of the world, more even than used in the construction of the great metal domes of Zaofu. Metallic dust, fragments of metal plates, broken blades, metal cables, all of it swirling and circling as it seemed to eclipse both the sun and moon. Lightning would be useless against the mass, Kuvira had proved that with far less. Korra scrambled to one side as a battleship tumbled past her, tipping end over end, panicked crew still inside, helpless to do anything as it vanished into the mass, the huge vessel broken down to fragments like everything else. The sky was different, strange. Harmonic convergence was here, the celestial event filling her veins with fire, her vision clear as if the air was gone, the rock beneath her as malleable as water. The stars blazed in the heavens and the moon glowed with a full moon's light beside the sun. The moon. Water was her best defense against the metal for now. "Thank you, Korra said as she drew a torrent of water from the lake. Not a moment too soon. A new rain of sharpened metal points flew from the clouds surrounding Kuvira to stab at her. Ice was enough to stop and trap them, but for every projectile she countered, 1,000 followed. Korra needed more water. Clouds, there was water in clouds, where rain came from after all. Hopefully all she would need. Korra reached out and drew the floating water down to her. Water for support, fire whips to take care of the projectiles. How long could she keep this up? She had speed, but Kuvira did not even seem a little tired. One mistake and she could trap her. Her muscles burned and ached, the mental effort to keep on bending almost too much. The sky darkened further as the thick waves of ash from the volcano spread through the air like now. Could the choking ash and toxic fumes kill Kuvira? She at least could keep the poisoned air from reaching her at bay, but her opponent had no such method. More cyclones, this time to send a surge of contaminated air at Kuvira. Once again her opponent demonstrated her reactions and her speed. She was still too fast. Kuvira's metal cloud solidified and molded into plates. Huge fins tore at the air and blasted the noxious air well away from Kuvira. Wait. She had not quite eliminated it all. Kuvira was breathing harder now, struggling against to breath easily. Not enough though. More fire. Korra blasted the metal cloud with as much fire as she could will. If it were too hot, Kuvira could not easily use it for defense. If she had to discard enough, the cloud would no longer work effectively as a lightning rod. More fire. The heat must be close to unbearable now. The metal shifted, red-hot glowing metal falling back and replaced by cooler sections from further away. She was relying solely on her metal. Just like that first fight. Kuvira gestured past her and a wave of heat enveloped Korra's back. She turned almost too late to see the mass of tumbling, lava-coated rock almost strike her. Korra dropped lower, the rock smashing through the space she had been moments before, and behind it others followed. The ash was still surging up into the sky. Soon it seemed like it would not just be Republic City consumed by the ash, but the whole kingdom. Did Kuvira realize that? What could Korra do now? Save the suffering the ash would bring or stop the embodiment of chaos? Kuvira! Stop this! Korra yelled. The Great Uniter turned to stare at her slowly, only now seeming to notice her again. What do you hope to accomplish? Korra yelled. Amazingly her words seemed to reach Kuvira. Her expression was unreadable though. Was that confusion? Pain? Anger? No way to tell anymore. Kuvira grimaced, the cloud of metal shifting in the blink of an eye. Now it was a circling mass of sharpened metal. Korra had only a moment to wrap a layer of air and water around herself before the bombardment began. Metal spheres, sharpened blades, all stabbed and shot forward. Deflected for now, but she could not resist or tolerate the speed of the attacks for long. There was a new flicker of light and a corresponding roar in the air. Lightning arced and exploded above the erupting volcano. A chance to strike unexpectedly. The knowledge was right there in her head, a product of the former avatars. Korra reached out, tugging at the thick clouds and the water that composed them. They moved towards her and brought the frenzied, crackling snaps of lightning with them. Deep breath and Korra caught the next lightning strike, guiding into her and channeling it through her body to send it surging towards Kuvira. Her opponent's metal shield slammed into place before it could close to touching her. Again. Korra pulled at the clouds again, another bolt, another redirection. The metal continued to catch the blasts, but not without cost. The lightning was not striking Kuvira, but it was damaging and heating the metal further. Unlike before, now the entire spinning cloud of defensive metal glowed deep red. Another strike. For a moment the debris cloud pulsed a brighter red and then fell away. A whole battlefield of metal raining down onto the ground, Kuvira's limp body falling with it. She had finally connected? Korra descended after her. It looked like the lightning had burned Kuvira's skin and her hair had come undone. Her limp body smashed into the ground painfully and lay still. Little hope she was still alive after that. Was it over? She approached Kuvira, readying herself to check for a pulse. She jumped back as Kuvira rolled agonizingly over. Something was wrong. A guttural scream came accompanied by splintering, painful noises emerging from her throat. Kuvira's limbs moved awkwardly, as if they broken. Her eyes were lost beneath a brilliant red sheen, and the symbol of Vato glowed beneath the burnt sections of her uniform. Avatar, she snarled, her voice echoing. No more defenses. One good blast of lightning and it would be over. Kuvira sprang forward in the same moment the spark left Korra's hand. The strike hit Kuvira head-on, but momentum kept her opponent moving and the blade she held plunged into Korra's chest. Korra gasped as the pain erupted through her. Her knees gave out under her, her arms fell limp at her sides and she could do nothing to break her fall to the ground. Kuvira lay slumped beside her, eyes open but vacant, her chest unmoving. Korra tried to breathe, her chest agonizing around the blade. Kuvira was no more. Vato stopped. But at the cost of herself. Repeat, the United Forces has control over the Gangsu Plains. All combatants must cease fighting and evacuate. Iroha's voice was barely audible as they scrambled across the landscape, the horrifying heat of the lava following swiftly behind them. The ground was in constant motion, the entire landscape seeming to shift from one configuration to the next between eye blinks. Random geysers, both water and lava, spurted up into the air across the entire area. All around them broken mecha tanks and discarded metal shards littered the landscape. The only things that had escaped Kuvira's reach were some of the more distant airships and the platinum mecha tanks. Bumi had radioed in anything still capable of flying and the airships frantically ferried people away from the volcano. Fire Nation and Earth Empire added their capabilities, all thought of fighting lost in the face of the encroaching lava. Each one was jam-packed full of people, just getting on board was an awkward squeeze. Difficult to know which airship to try. Wei and Wing were somewhere lost in the panic. Bolin had wound up with just Opal and Zuli by his side. Too panicked to relax until the airship took off, but the relief did not last long. With a wobbling whine of engines, the airship was barely clearing the ground. Zuli stared up. Some way to improve the engines. We can't all go this way, Bolin said, staring at the ground only meters below them. If I go, maybe it will be light enough. Don't be silly. Zuli said. To make an appreciable weight difference we would need dash. Too late. He must have slipped. Zuli reached out to grab him and tumbled from the craft. Opal shared their fate as she tried to grab at either of them. For a moment they hung in the airship shooting away from them. Bolin groaned as he slammed into the ground, Zuli faring only a little better. Opal grimaced as she pushed herself upright. The lava was at least still distant. Okay. Let's get dash. The ground trembled and a plume of lava fountained up horrifyingly close by. We can wait it out, Bolin murmured and lifted the section of rock they were standing on higher. The lava flowed around the obstacle like water, trapped on a tiny island in a lake of lava. Bolin shook his head. If I cool it down, we can just walk to safety, he yelled. Opal stared around at the landscape. Walk to where? There was lava everywhere, and the distant crater still belched fire and smoke. They would have to walk miles and forever risking a new surge of lava, if it was cool enough. He had faith though, and if anyone could get them out of this it would be Bolin. He gestured, hardening the nearest lava into cold stone. Maybe it would. A new wave of lava rushed over the cooled section in a moment. Bolin scowled and lifted his hands. He blinked and abruptly slumped back, his chest wheezing. Give me a minute, he begged. Just a minute. Take as long as you need, Opal said gently. Zuli took Opal's hand, her touch soft. Her glasses had gone missing in the fall, her eyes even prettier when seen direct and up close. Opal leaned her forehead against Zuli's and stared into her eyes. Thank you, Zuli said. For everything. Her lips touched Opal's and she stopped worrying. What more could they say and what more could they do? At least she defeated Vato. Korra smiled. As long as the next avatar realized what she did, the pain shot through her again as she shifted, her body lying awkwardly on the rough ground. And if nothing else, it was clear she was not going to break the cycle. Her successor would be able to fix all this, rebuild anew, rebuild better. How much longer did she have to wait? Korra stared around her. So much blood. She was never going to see Bolin or Asami again. Never see Iroh or Wing and Wei. Or Opal and Zuli. Her parents would lose her all over again. There was so much she wanted to do. Spend more time with Bolin. Maybe go back into prob ending. Spend more time with Bolin and everything they could do together. The ground trembled, the volcano was still active even with its instigator dead. Someone should stop it. She should stop it. Korra stared at her arm stretched out beside her. One finger twitched as she focused everything on moving it. Something at least. Her hand grasped. Feeling was coming back, something more than just pain. Korra moved her hand exploring the blade where it met her skin. Odd. It did not seem to have gone very deep. The cut was shallow. So why had she been unable to move, unable to feel? The lightning. Korra's hope blossomed. She must have caught some of the numbing crackle through the blade when Kuvira stabbed her. She was not dying. Korra groaned as she pulled herself into a sitting position. Not dying, but badly injured. Really, she should leave the blade in no time, and it would only get in the way. She pulled the metal shard from her chest, blood flowed out of her and it took a few minutes of agonized concentration to draw enough water from the air to at least patch the wound. Not her best work, not the strongest healing. Enough for now. Time for the volcano. Maybe she could do what Roku did? Cool the lava, all of it? Maybe not, that was exactly what led to his death, though the Fire Lord deserved some of the blame. No. It would not do for this. Korra pulled herself into the air and flew towards the volcano. What should she do? Korra. Aang. Korra asked. His voice echoed by others. More and more voices, all familiar. Her past lives echoed in the air. What should I do? She asked them all. They answered, knowledge from the past flooding into her. Everything any avatar knew about fire, earth, water, and air. Harmonic convergence still surged through her and she gasped. There had been intimate moments with Asami and intimate moments with Bolin she clung to as the most pleasurable she had experienced. The full force of harmonic convergence was something that far exceeded any of them. She could feel the world, the whole world around her, beneath her and above her. The mass of rock they walked on. The deep seas surrounding their islands. The layer of air on top and above all that, the gigantic endless fire of the sun. "We are all here," an echoing voice said. It sounded like Rava, Ain, Roku, Kyoshi, it sounded like everyone. "I'm not alone," Korra breathed. She dropped towards the lava and began to bend. "I'm sorry," Bolin said. "We couldn't let you sacrifice yourself," Zuli said, her arms wrapped around Opal. "Not after you tried to already." "Our choice," Opal added. "To be with you like this." "You two are amazing," Bolin said, opening his eyes. The two girls held their arms out to him. At least they won the battle, at least they stopped the revolvers. At least their loved ones would have a better future after their sacrifices. Korra would have a better future. "So glad I met you too. We should meet up, in the next life if we can." "All of us," Opal said, nodding. Bolin tightened his grip on the two girls as the earth shook again, ash raining down around them. His eyes were watering and there was nothing to do but wait. A flicker in the sky made him look up. The sky grew darker, the brilliant glow of the lava growing more and more intense in the darkness. Lightning crackled across the sky. The sun was suddenly blazing down from a growing space in the dark clouds. No. The clouds were drawn into a ring far up in the sky, all the ash funneled into a massive ring of darkness. Fire and debris leapt and danced as they moved up to join the ash. He must be seeing things. Giant, translucent figures moved in the sky all across the battlefield. Bolin stared at the nearest. It looked a lot like they were bending, or at least demonstrating the forms. Hundreds, no thousands of them. Different tribes, different eras judging by the clothing. "Is that Opal began?" "Who are they?" Zuli asked. Bolin could not find the words to reply and just stared. The figures moved away from them and clustered around a singular blue dot in the middle of the sky. It hung in the air for a moment and then plunged down towards the volcano. One solitary figure. Korra. It had to be Korra. "No!" Bolin yelled. The dot stopped. Had she heard him? Or was this always her intent, never once intending to sacrifice herself? Something was happening. The volcano erupted again, but as the lava burst upwards it faded and grew dimmer. A pulse seemed to pass through everything and the lava lost its heat and brightness. The lava was cooling. But rather than hardening to dark basalt, it was becoming blue and shiny, it was changing to crystal. Bolin stared at the volcano and the remnants of the lava plumes now rendered as gigantic crystalline structures hanging in the air above the crater. Book 3, Lightning. Final chapter, Avatar Korra. The world was a brilliant glare, too big, too bright. Her mind seemed to fizzle and crackle while her memories stretched for centuries. The world was somehow evasive around her, indistinct and intangible. Korra blinked. The glare was gone and in its place was a sea of stars stretching out as far as she could see. She floated in nothing, on nothing, surrounded on all sides by the entire galaxy. Alone. No, not alone. There was something nearby, a familiar, welcome presence. "Rava." "Korra," a voice replied. Korra twisted her head around looking for the spirit. She was nowhere in sight, just more stars. "Where are you?" She blinked. Maybe I should be asking where am I? Is this the spirit world? Was Rava chuckling? It sounded like she was. A strange notion of someone like her being so human. "It is not so much a place," she replied after a pause. "But more of a what than a where. What you see here, this is my true form." The stars shifted, blazing brighter for a moment and then receded. The galaxy fell away from Korra and now clustered into enormous collections of stars, the scale almost beyond her comprehension. "I am harmony," Rava continued. Another shift and now the stars rushed towards her. Or was she moving towards them? Falling towards the central glowing mass ahead of her. "Your world awaits you again, Avatar Korra." "Rava." Korra breathed. The stars faded and now the spirit's humanoid form floated beside her. Rava took her hand and Korra smiled. "I'm glad I could meet you." There was something else nearby, another familiar presence but barely anything beyond a faint impression in the air. Korra concentrated and everything became clear. Her predecessors surrounded her on every side, every other avatar. All of you. I'm glad I could meet you too. The reply seemed to echo as 1,000 voices spoke at once. I will always be with you, ready to help as needed. Eventually we shall all meet again, in 10,000 years' time. Korra nodded. Until then. The presences faded until only Rava remained. I cannot say goodbye for I can never leave you, Rava said. We will continue your journey together. The world faded, Rava fading into darkness as a comforting warmth enveloped her. Korra. A familiar voice asked. Aang. Korra blinked her eyes open. Tenzin was staring down at her and grinned. Close, he replied. Very close. He sighed. It's good to see you're okay. The world seemed to spark and crackle around them and she still felt oddly weightless. The sensation did not last, with a rush her limbs felt heavy. Pain erupted all over her body. Her legs ached. All of her seemed to ache. Can you stand? Maybe, Korra said, heaving herself up and regretting trying. No. She could do this. Korra gritted her teeth against the pain and slowly pushed herself up into a standing position. The wrap around her shoulders seemed to get in the way. She was on the verge of letting it fall from her shoulders when she noticed that most of her clothes were little more than tattered rags hanging off her. Her feet pulsed with pain and she staggered, Tenzin quick to catch her arm. She smiled a thank you and together they walked out. Out? Out of what? The floor, walls, ceiling, all of it seemed to be a strange blue crystal. Where had she been before? Dropping into a volcano. Was this what they looked like inside? Surely not. Where was the lava? The sunlight hurt her eyes but it was not enough to prevent her staring up at the towering crystal structure above them. This was new. It looked a little like the caves beneath Omashu and the Earth Palace, but different somehow. It looked odd from this angle, the form unclear from this angle. Korra lowered her gaze to find another surprise. Spread out before her was a whole field of crystals stretching out in all directions. It felt peaceful. Her heart lurched and she calmed a second later. She could see no fighting, hear no fighting. Tenzin seemed completely relaxed. Well, not completely. But his concern was her not worrying about an Earth Empire soldier taking pot shots at them. Tenzin gestured to someone in a United Forces uniform. Let people know the Avatar is okay, he said quietly. The woman nodded and darted away after staring in awe at Korra. Is it really over? Korra asked, almost fearing the answer. Yes. The Earth Empire was stopped. Yes. The war was over, and now she knew it was if the last of the tension left her muscles. She could not hope to keep herself upright and sagged against Oji. Come on. You need rest, Tenzin said gently as he bent the air to gently lift her onto Oji's saddle. Korra could barely sit upright and laid down, pulling the wrap tighter around her. So many more questions, so much she needed to know, but the exhaustion was overpowering. Katara almost ran into Iroh, staring intently at a clipboard. General. My apologies, Katara said and bowed. She had not been watching where she was going and now froze as Iroh bowed in reply. 3,800, Iroh said, following her gaze to the vast array of bodies were laid out nearby. Combined from both sides. That number will very likely increase over the next few hours. We have over 2,000 missing from our counts. He sighed. That number not includes the Avatar but also her friends. Iroh looked exhausted. You need to rest, Katara said, frowning. He was pushing himself. Or at least some form of healing. Do you dash? General Iroh. A soldier ran up to them and saluted. We recovered the body of a woman from the lake. Captain Issei has requested your presence to identify her. Why me? Iroh replied, just about keeping his voice in check. It's one of the biplane pilots, badly burned and dash, the soldier squirmed. Go, Katara said. You need to know, she added. I might need some support, he muttered. Can you dash? She nodded. Thank you, he said to the soldier. Please tell the captain I am on my way. The soldier ran off. Walking past so many dead people was strange. Even during her younger days she had not seen anything quite like this. Captain Issei saluted as Iroh approached. General, I dash. Dismissed, Iroh said, his voice hollow. He stared at the body for a long moment. The pilot, whoever she was, had her face covered. A moment. Please, he said to Katara, who turned away as he crouched down beside her. He was silent for a long while. Katara opened her mouth to ask if it was a Sami when a dark shape descended out of the sky. Druk, and with only a single rider, a gray-haired woman. Katara started forward, but Iroh was already sprinting past her. Lifted the woman down and cradled her. She had stirred a moment later. Katara was too far away to hear what the pair said. By the time she reached them, Azula was hugging Iroh. Would wonders never cease? A strange noise drew her attention away from them. Druk was making a low keening noise in his throat. I've never. Is he okay? Katara asked. He will be, Iroh said. Eventually. He sighed. Druk is in mourning. He stepped away from Azula and ran his hand along Druk's flank. I think you need a distraction, he muttered. Let's see if we can help someone, anyone. He leapt astride Druk, lashed the reins and together they flew up high. Azula's legs seemed to give out a moment later and she collapsed to the ground, her teeth gritted. Katara gasped as she finally got a good look at her. A crimson mark marred a good chunk of Azula's face. Azula, you dash. Katara knelt beside her and ran some water over her skin. It seemed to at least reduce her pain somewhat. Azula opened her eyes and stared at her. You need healing, Katara said forcibly. Come on. Let's get you to a bed. Azula stared at her for another moment before she nodded. She even allowed Katara to pull her to her feet. I'll get Izumi to collect you later, Katara continued, not letting silence fall between them, even if she was the only one talking. So strange, they had not talked in years, and never really talked before that either. Azula looked good for her age, though to see her now was still the jarring contrast between the girl she fought and the elderly woman beside her. I can get home by myself, Azula replied. Katara glanced at her. The dragon will take me. Druk. His name is Druk, Katara said quietly. Druk. I feel he needs some company. I think that would be good. For both of you. They reached the medical tent and Katara made a start on Azula's injuries. It did not take long, as much as she could do anyway. Let me know if you feel any more pain. Okay. Azula glared at her. I'll be fine. Her hand only trembled a little as she lifted it to trace the burnt part of her cheek. At least it's on a different side. Katara took a deep breath, the tears and sorrow threatening to overwhelm her. What had Zuko done in his last moments? Save his sister? Try to stop the lava flow? I feel I should thank you. We all do. If not for you I doubt many would have made it out on time. I didn't do it for you, Azula snapped. Katara smiled and shook her head. That doesn't matter. You helped save us all. So, thank you. Azula did not reply and glanced away from her. Korra blinked at the ceiling. Not crystal this time, it looked like it was canvas. She fidgeted and groaned as the pain lanced through her again. Korra. That sounded a lot like Opal. Opal? Is that you? Korra leaned her head up. Opal was sat beside the bed with a book open on her lap. You're okay. She smiled. The others. The smile vanished. My aunt and my brothers, they're fine. She paused, and took a deep breath. Opal looked about to say something, but shook herself instead. He's fine. She reached out to touch Korra's arm. Bolin's been hurt but Zuli is with him at the moment. There was one name missing, one Opal could not have missed by accident. Where is Asami? We don't know, Opal said helplessly after a pause. No one's seen her yet. All we do know is she's not among the recovered bodies we've found. Korra heaved herself up, trying to ignore the rapidly increasing pain. I need to dash. You need to rest, Opal said urgently and looked around in worry. No nurses in sight, No one to stop Korra. Not yet, Korra said through gritted teeth. I need to see them all. I need to see Bolin, she added as she swung her feet out of the bed and stood up. Korra swayed and a dull ache developed in a matter of moments. No. She could not let this stop her. Where is he? She sighed and stood, closing her book as she did so. This way. But Opal shook her head. Korra, you need to be prepared. He's unconscious. She turned away and headed out of the tent, Korra with no choice but to follow. Her awkward limp soon attracted attention. Healers she waved away, though many seemed to just stare at her in awe. It did not matter. Not right now. She could have never found him without Opal. There were so many medical tents, each identical to the last, his not far from hers. Like Opal, Zuli had been reading as she sat beside him and looked up at their approach. Bolin did not move. He lay with his eyes closed, his face badly reddened and his breathing shallow. He's been unconscious since yesterday, Zuli said as she rose to her feet reaching for Opal's hand. Tired, Korra muttered as she knelt beside him. Bolin. Nothing. No reaction. Korra took his hand. Bolin. Still nothing. Why was he not awake? Has he been healed? More than once. They've done everything they could, Zuli said. We are waiting to see if Master Katara can do anything. I'm going to try too, Korra interrupted. Water, I need water, she said. Opal darted away and returned in a moment with a sloshing container. More than enough, but Korra was going to use it all. For a moment she worried that her bending would be gone again, but she could feel the water and all its potential without another thought. Everything came back without problem and she guided the water across Bolin's body, the glow of healing flickering as it touched cuts and bruises. All his physical wounds must be gone by now, but it seemed as if there was still something wrong with Bolin's head. If she concentrated the water there momentary panic. Did she have the first idea of what she was doing? No, was she certain that this would not damage or injure him in some way? The fear ate away in the pit of her stomach but she ignored it. She had to try. Korra, a quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. Her hands wavered and the glow vanished, the water flowing unguided off of Bolin's skin and into the bed. She looked up at the newcomer. Iroh. He looked oddly pensive and more than a little uncomfortable. Are you okay? How is he? Iroh replied, either not hearing or just ignoring the question. We need Katara, Opal said glaring at him. Do you know where she is? Not sure, he said. If I find her Any news on Asami? Korra asked, stopping him as he started turning away. Iroh sighed. There was a problem with her biplane during the battle. She crashed. His expression hardened. We're not sure where though, there are more than one possible crash sites, but with everything else it's taking a long time to check them. I'm going to help too, Korra interrupted. Korra, you need to rest. Zuli started. She glanced at Opal who shook her head. You'll go no matter what. I have to, Korra replied. But I'll be back. I have to do that too. She leaned over and kissed Bolin. Be awake when I bring her back too. Okay. She whispered. She limped towards the tent flaps and stopped. Okay. I might need Naga to help. Can we get her here? We already brought her for you. Opal shot one more annoyed glance at Iroh and hurried towards her. This way. No patience. Not over this. At least all the possible crash sites were well away from the limits of the lava flow if not necessarily the ash. How long until she had to accept the ash could have buried Asami? Korra shook her head and kept looking. The medical rescue team she demanded follow her was quickly left in Naga's wake as they rushed across the land to each possible crash site in turn. She needed to be patient, getting herself there quicker did her desperation to find Asami no good at all when it turned out she was not there. She healed any survivors as she waited for the others to catch up, and covered the bodies when she arrived too later. The crystals were few and far between out this far, the ground soft and damp thanks to an earlier rainstorm. The air was nicely cool, but the weather was making tracking much more difficult for Naga. Asami's scent would be completely washed away by the downpour. Could Korra have done more before in those moments when the fighting was still happening? If she had made other choices when fighting Kuvira, could she perhaps have stopped some of these dead bodies they found ending up like this? Or was she right to focus on Kuvira with a single-minded intensity, to ensure her defeat? Impossible to tell. Maybe a delay would have seen more die from the earthquakes or lava flow. There was some solace in the attitudes of the medical team. No one minded about the survivors, Earth Empire or United Forces, they treated all equally. A few Earth Empire soldiers tried to beg her for forgiveness. "Don't worry," she replied in a soft voice. "It's over. No more fighting." They still stared at her fearfully even as she mended their wounds and attempted quiet, idle conversation as they waited for the others to arrive. The billowing silk of a parachute was what first caught her eye. Every other crash had been a waterlogged hole in the ground for the most part, marked with a twisted metal frame that might once have been a biplane. Korra traced the fluttering trail as it billowed in the wind. The silk seemed to have twisted around something on the ground. It looked a lot like a pilot. Her heart hammered as she leapt from Naga's back, bracing herself for disappointment, bracing herself for sorrow, bracing herself for hope. The pilot was almost cocooned in the parachute, only just out of the water. Korra untwisted the silk, her pulse pounding. Asami Sato's eyes remained closed but she was still breathing. "Asami?" she asked. "Nothing. Not you too. Too much like Bolin." Korra pulled the goggles and helmet from Asami's head. Blood stained her lips and her face was badly bruised. The most beautiful girl in the world was somewhere under this mass of bruises and scratches. Korra drew water from the lake and healed her, watching and fearing for an injury in her head. No damage there it seemed, but Asami was not waking. The water had glowed and nothing. Korra held Asami against her chest. "Korra!" a voice murmured after a long pause. "Asami!" Korra's eyes blurred with tears and she kissed her Asami. And again, stopping a moment later at Asami's wince and the taste of blood in her mouth. "Sorry. Do things hurt in the spirit world?" Asami asked vaguely. Korra shook her head. "You're still in our world. I made it then." Asami smiled. "Worried I wasn't going to see you again. Happy to prove you wrong." Asami shivered and Korra drew her closer. "This is making me think of that first time. In the snow. So cold. You kept me warm." She leaned up and kissed Korra again. "Thank you, though I think I need to get dry at some point." "Glad you're okay." Korra breathed and wiped the tears from her eyes. "Let's go home." Korra helped Asami limp to Naga. Hopefully the polar bear dog would help keep Asami warm. "Oh. Home should be okay in case you wondered. Or at least the volcano was stopped." Korra glanced over her shoulder at Asami. "Not sure if you knew about that." "The Chinbei exploded." "I know, I saw it," Asami said. "And I saw you. That was." She hugged her. "You're still amazing." They were approaching the medical team, and she forgotten to check for any other bodies at the crash site. Korra scowled, ready to turn back when Lin leapt down from one of the Sato mobiles. "Korra!" she shouted. "The Empire, they're massing to attack again." "Still?" Asami asked in disbelief. "Hard to imagine, isn't it?" Korra shook her head. "Sorry, I think I need to handle this." "Naga, you take care of Asami." "Lin, come with me please," Korra said as she slipped from Naga's back. So this was what remained of the Earth Empire, more than had remained after Amon's defeat. And better armed, presumably the airships nearby were part of the faction in addition to the few mecha tanks she could see. "I'm going to call for reinforcements," Lin muttered as she stared down from the airship. "Wait." Korra caught her arm. "I want to try and talk to them first." "Even after all this?" Lin asked in amazement. "Because of all this. I'll be fine. Just stay back, and keep everyone else out of attack range for now. Wait for my signal before you do anything." Lin nodded reluctantly. No glider this time, but it was easy to bend the wind to let her glide to the ground without injury. All eyes were on her. "Earth Empire. I am Avatar Korra. I will no longer tolerate any acts of military aggression against this land or by your country." The Great Uniter is dead. Batar Jr. is dead. Your goal can no longer be achieved. Korra shook her head. Please, surrender. A glimpse of fear within the ranks, nervous glances and hands tightening on weapons, they were afraid of her. Was this how Kuvira had ruled them? Compassion then. Anyone who wishes to be free from the Earth Empire, I am your avatar too. I will support your defection. That was enough to spur some of them into motion. Almost half the assembled soldiers rushed away from the group, their hands raised. Behind them former comrades and commanding officers jeered and called them traitors. A gesture from one of the higher-ranking members of the Empire caused a mecha tank to fire its cables at the fleeing men. Korra effortlessly knocked them away with a wave of her hand. These people are now under my protection. Do not attack them. Please, stop this. We will never give up. Someone yelled from the remaining mass, others cheering them in support. Surrender is a worse fate than death. Attack the Avatar. Another voice yelled. More metal cables from the mecha tanks hurtled towards her, as easy to knock away as the first attack. The cables splashed and burrowed into the mud. Is that all you can do? She asked. Continue the attack. Earth cannons, arrows, bombs all centered on her. All of it futile. Earth shields and air were enough to block the attacks as the first wave of defectors struggled to distance themselves from the conflict. Korra did not feel even a little tired, she could keep on going until they used up all their ammunition, let them try. Even if it was beginning to get boring. Finally a call for the attacks to stop. Korra did nothing but stare at the Earth Empire as the dust cleared, they looked horrified. Korra raised her hands and dragged every single metallic object they possessed towards her. All the swords, internal mecha tank wiring, cables, buttons, the mass of metal soon formed a large pile in front of her. Avenge the Great Uniter. Not surrender, still more aggression. Another wave of futile attacks. Rocks became powder as she caught them in the air. Why would they not stop? Why persist like this? With a cold fury she bent the air above them and forced everyone against the ground with a roaring wind. What do you hope to accomplish? She yelled. The war is over. With a strain she let the wind subside, a number of terrified soldiers remaining prostrate on the ground. But others still stood defiantly, staring at her with contempt. Please surrender. She asked. Never. Korra sighed and tore the cables from the mecha tanks. Quick enough to restrain them all. I am going to ask Captain Lin to arrest you, she said to the defiant soldiers. The rest of you should go home. Tell everyone what happened, what you saw, what you felt. Please, tell them I do not seek conflict. Let them know that I seek only peace, but that to achieve that peace I had to destroy the Great Uniter. I am not threatening anyone, but if I am pushed to extremes I will react appropriately. If anyone else tries a similar path to Kuvira I will likely be forced to deal with them in the same way. She stared at them for a long moment. Now go. The soldiers scrambled to her feet and fled. How can you remain so loyal? She asked the generals. Despite everything Kuvira has done. She was there for us, one said. When you weren't. Where were you when the queen died? Nowhere. In hiding. Kuvira saved us dash. Kuvira murdered the queen, Korra said trying to keep cool. She caused this entire situation. Lies. The Equalists bear the responsibility. Korra shook her head. Anyone else? Another opened and closed his mouth a few times before replying. The camps. I've never seen them. I thought they were just rumors from your side. But if they're real. He shivered. Forgive us. Please. Korra continued and asked each of the question, one by one. Some seemed like Kuvira's personality transplanted into another body, their views biased and unsettling. To some the Great Uniter's actions were entirely justified. Others were uncomfortable with her methods but saw it as the only possible means to an end. A few had been homeless, starving and weak when they joined up. Loyalty was life and defiance invited only death in the ranks of the Earth Empire. Some insisted they had fought Kuvira and lost. Korra left them be as she signaled Lin forward and strolled back towards the base camp deep in thought. A scuffle not far from the tents drew her attention, United Forces troops attacking and belittling the surrendered Earth Empire soldiers. Stop this at once, she demanded. Avatar Korra. The captain asked. He looked confused. You won, Captain. There is no need for violence now, Korra said. But, they deserve it. After all they did. He glared at the prisoners. I lost my family in the Hainan province thanks to the Earth Empire. Was it these men? Korra asked. Are they the ones responsible? The captain shook his head. Not these people. I would have killed them if they were. But what does it matter? They're all as guilty as each other. All of them. From the highest general to the lowest grunt, guilty. We must cleanse the world of them. The captain looked serious, and far too many of the onlookers were nodding at his words. Then what makes you so different to the Great Uniter? Korra asked. Avatar Korra — the captain began. No. I don't want to hear your excuse. But I am having a very hard time distinguishing between you and the Great Uniter. She killed the Earth Queen and her entire family. Thanks to that she went on to destroy most of the kingdom. She insisted on punishing the Fire Nation for the sins of their fellows and their ancestors. If you enact revenge upon these men for what some other members of the Earth Empire did to your family, how are you any different? This battle, it will all be for nothing. Korra was seething. But they've killed. You want to just let them go? The captain asked, bewildered. There is no peace without justice. Korra drew herself up. Avatar Kyoshi imparted that wisdom to me. They will be judged like the others, fairly. I will personally investigate any deaths of Earth Empire prisoners. Is that clear? No indiscriminate executions. Korra closed her eyes and drifted. The spirit world was a relief after a day spent healing and defusing tensions. What troubles you? Aang. She opened her eyes. He was sitting in the void opposite her. Well, we won. I guess that should be obvious given I'm still me and I'm not whoever the next avatar will be. We won, but somehow, it doesn't feel like a victory. Nothing I could have done would have stopped the fight in the end, but wish it could have. I can't stop thinking about how many innocents died as a result. The overly familiar prickle of tears formed in her eyes as she told him everything, the increasing number of dead bodies recovered from the battlefield, and how many loved ones now gone. And Bolin still unconscious. What if he never — No. Remain hopeful. You know. Zuko is gone. Right. He nodded. The sun has set, but there will be a new dawn. Your light will shine in these dark times, Aang said. Of that I have no doubt. But everything is just becoming more difficult. The Earth Empire was using farmers. Farmers. People who had never fought or even wanted to. They didn't care. Didn't matter if someone was injured or sick or homeless, they were just given a uniform and told to march with the others. It's the Red Lotus, I understand them just about. They were all united for one cause. So were the Equalists. No one forced them into, well. They might have forced the nations into their mindsets if they had succeeded, but. Korra shook her head. They were nothing like this. The Earth Empire was a country with millions of people. And they were desperate enough to fight for Kuvirao's ideals. Some of them just wanted things to change. Aang sighed. I too know what this is like. I too once had the weight of the world on my shoulders, but still I feel somewhat humbled. I merely stopped Oze, a powerful firebender. You prevented 10,000 years of chaos by defeating Vato. Korra could not help the smile. Fighting is hard, but also simpler, isn't it? Defeating someone because I'm stronger is easy because I'm the avatar. Actually solving problems. That's much more different. And a lot more complicated. Aang nodded. You have grown wise. There is no definitive answer. We can do little but try as much as we can to not resort to fighting. And you are not alone, I and the other past avatars are with you. As are your friends and family. So many people needed her, and she just wanted to be at Bolin's bedside. Katara looked concerned when Korra finally made it back to his tent. Korra How bad could it be? Korra pushed right past her and Katara made no move to follow. He was still there. Korra choked out a delighted gasp and sat beside him, always worried that whenever she left he would be gone. But he was still here now. And he was still breathing. But still asleep. She could only stay a few minutes. More soldiers refusing to surrender, people in need of more potent healing. She managed a few words with Asami on her way back and forth. She at least claimed to be fine but deeply exhausted. Fine apparently extended to a few cracked ribs and some horrible bruising, but she was recovering fast. Unlike Bolin, who remained unchanged since the battle. The days merged into an endless span of time, punctuated only by light and dark. People insisted she rest, but that was just not possible. When Korra returned later, she checked Bolin's chest still rose and fell as normal and slumped beside him. Maybe if they went to sleep together, they would wake up together? Please wake up, she whispered. We have so much to do now. And so much to say. It was terrible to keep thinking about how easily this could all go wrong, how he was so close and yet so impossibly far from her. Korra closed her eyes and night seemed to pass in a moment. When she opened her eyes it was bright and Bolin was moving. Wait. He was waking up. Bolin? She asked excitedly. He opened his eyes and smiled at her. She repeated his name, leaning forward to kiss him. Something was wrong. He looked worried and confused. Bolin. She tried. Korra. He replied, his voice croaky and loud. Something had happened to Korra's voice. Was she injured? Gone mute? He tried to say her name, only something had happened to his voice too. Bolin could hear nothing. She was staring at him with worry. He repeated her name and she bolted from beside his bed. Bolin turned to watch, trying to reach out for her, every part of him hurting. He could not even hope to crawl after her. Nothing he could do but wait for her. Korra eventually re-entered the tent, Katara just behind her. Katara was saying something and Korra's expression grew more and more horrified as she listened, interjecting and interrupting often. Katara looked sad but somewhat sympathetic. Eventually she walked away and Korra returned to beside his bed and slumped beside him. His head was pulsing with pain and dizziness as Korra kissed him, her eyes overflowing with tears. And he could not protest in the slightest. The silence made sleeping so much more difficult, the sensation odd, different. He kept waking up, wary of missing something, of sleeping too long. It did not seem to be helping his tiredness. Korra had looked so reluctant to leave and said something, urgent and at length before kissing him again. If only he could read lips. What had she tried to say to him? Other than being unable to hear, he seemed more or less fine. Injured, exhausted, and it hurt to move, but there were few cuts and bruises on his skin. Opal and Zuli came to visit. They seemed happy to see him, still somewhat sad at his seeming fate. Wing and Wei were the first to bother writing things down for him to read, and mentioned a possible cure involving acupuncture and a specific blend of herbs. Some hope at least. Asami? He asked at one point. Wei wrote safe on a piece of paper. Another relief. Where was she though? The world had never been this silent. It looked like there was a radio nearby. What was on right now? A drama? The news? Music? Anything would have been preferable to this. Was this it then? Would he never hear the radio again? If he could not hear his cues, he would never be in movers again. Think of something else, anything. He could already feel the telltale prickle of tears. He could communicate to a point, but it was still slow and awkward to talk to his friends. And his plans with Korra? Could they still achieve any of them? Would she even want to be with someone who could not hear her? So many problems stemming from his decision to take Iroha's mission. But whatever happened, he was certain he had made the right choice. The one that allowed so many to survive. He had no regrets. It took a while for him to realize that while his hearing was gone, seismic sense still worked well. Footsteps moving back and forth, that clearer sensation must be the heavy-set healer rather than any of the others. The fainter sensation there was the woman with the engagement necklace. Still more people needed healing. He could sense the world at least, it would not do to wallow in self-pity. Bolin almost did not look around at the new set of footsteps, but blinked in surprise as he did almost a moment too late. Asami Sato smiled at him and sat down beside him. He said her name and wanted to follow it up with 100 other questions. Not possible. She took his hand and said something. About the only thing he could be certain of was his name, and that was only due to very carefully watching her lips. Asami kissed his forehead and stayed beside him for the rest of the night. Rumors, he said. That just made her laugh. Later he could never be sure if it was all in his head or he had actually heard Asami. The song from their mover echoed in his head the next morning. His friends visited every day. Korra visited twice and, if she could get away with it, would sleep beside him. All except Iroh. And Zuko, a casualty of the battle, or rather the volcano, it quickly became apparent. Iroh must need some kind of assurance then. But even if he asked, the leader of the United Forces forever failed to visit. He never came. Asami and Korra came to deliver a bowl of soup from Senna the day before his discharge. As sad as it was, there was nothing more the healers could do for him. "Do I sound funny?" he asked. Was he speaking at all normally? She smiled and shook her head. "Okay, I just worry." She kissed him and said what looked like it's fine. Together they were at the front of the victory parade. The beat at least was clear through the ground, musicians, other soldiers, and vehicles, he could feel them all. The steady beat of people marching. Just a shame he was nowhere close enough to sense someone's words. Maybe something to work on. The parade ended at the new resting ground for those who did not survive the battle. Incense was lit and tributes of flowers laid on the individual tombstones, many with photographs in addition to the inscriptions. Bolin recognized a few faces. They were people he had saluted, shared meals with, trained, or in a few cases, simply talked to once or twice. He ducked his head and swiped at his eyes as the sorrow built inside him. How many had been like him? Dreaming of valor and the honor of fighting alongside the Avatar? How many could no longer pursue any other goal thanks to the fighting? The situation felt odd. Back when he was in the Earth Kingdom, so many had been just like him. All they wanted was a peaceful life with their families. How many like him had died? And how many like Njidi had been unable to escape Kuvira and with no choice but to bow to her, an action that led eventually to her death? Bolin tried to focus on the ceremony. There was a speech by Tenzin and a representative from each of the other world leaders. Too fast for him to lip read even in the front row alongside Asami and Korra. Iroh had failed to appear. Still too busy, or was he avoiding this? Opal and Zuli were nearby, Opal following Korra and delivering her own short speech. Zuli missed out. Her contribution was a secret thanks to her defection and the still alarming nature of the information she brought to them. Up on stage, Korra presented medals, the first of which went to Asami. A smile, a hug, and then a speech. What was Asami saying? And now it was his turn to go up on stage. The silence felt eerie, amplified by how many people were watching him. The audience at least seemed to be cheering him. Thousands clapping as he made his way on stage, and the sensation just about discernible through the ground. To his surprise, Tenzin presented him with a medal instead of Korra, though his disappointment evaporated a moment later as Tenzin bowed to him, the rest of the council doing likewise. "Is it okay if I say something too?" he asked. Tenzin nodded and gestured to the podium. "I am so honored to receive this medal." He glanced around, Korra smiling and Asami nodding encouragingly. "I was orphaned along with my brother Mako, and he is someone I would never have survived without. He taught me about everything, especially family, and wanted nothing in return. It's a shame he could not be here too, so I will just have to do my part as his legacy. He is and always will be my greatest hero, and I want everyone to know that. I'm dedicating this medal to him, my mother and my father, and to everyone who gave their lives for their loved ones. Thank you." The audience all applauded once more. The remembrance ceremony felt a lot like the fire festival on Ember Island. In much the same way, mourners lit incense and candles for. Tiny rafts carried the flames down the river, and as darkness fell the lanterns lit up the night. Even as people mourned, the city celebrated the peace that came with it. New monuments. There was now a shrine for Team Avatar, Sokka, Aang, and Topha's names carved into the rock already, and Zuko's to join them soon. The new team avatar, Tenzin, and his family were all present for his memorial with Katara leading the ceremony. It was no surprise that Azula was absent, still grieving in her own way, but Iroha's absence was much more troublesome. She should have been okay. Asami had told herself that through the whole ceremony, but as Katara said her last goodbyes to her old friend, she could no longer hold back the tears. Asami? Korra asked beside her. Going to miss him, she mumbled as Korra hugged her. Me too. Bolin was sniffing quietly nearby. Hard to forget how excited he had been with Zuko's autograph. Katara gave him a hug and Asami repeated the gesture a moment later. He needed all the support he could get at the moment, at least Korra distracted him with as much nonverbal conversation as she could. You know, Katara said. I feel if I leave the world now, I would consider myself blessed. What do you mean? Asami asked. I got to see the new team avatar save the world. She reached out and took Asami's hand and placed it on Bolin's. Katara brought Korra's hand to meet them a moment later. The three of you will find a way through anything. Even Bolin's hearing. She smiled and bowed to them. If you will excuse me. They were silent for a moment, just standing with their hands together, watching Katara shuffle away. I still can't believe the miracle, Asami said. Korra asked. You. What you did? I think it can't be considered anything short of a miracle. You saved everyone. The city, our friends, me. She pulled away slightly. I saw you. Up in the sky with the other avatars. What was it like? I was distracted at the time. I've never seen something so beautiful. Asami grimaced. Sorry. I don't quite know how to put it into words. I'll never forget it though. Korra grinned. Bolin said something similar. Must be true then. And now? Now I hope nothing changes in the future. Opal and her brothers looked solemn nearby. Give me a moment. Korra nodded and Asami headed for the buffongs. One more thing to do tonight. Can we talk? Sure, Opal said. I need to tell you something, about the battle. Asami took a deep breath. I'm the one who shot his airship down. I'm so sorry. She bowed. Opal shook her head. You had no choice. It was necessary. Her eyes flooded with tears and she threw her arms around Asami. I don't blame you. You had to make those difficult choices alone. Opal. Thank you. I couldn't have done it myself. Opal sobbed harder. I just wish he could have come back too. Iroh was not in his office. Or his apartment. Running short on ideas, Asami asked to Naga. The polar bear dog lead her, at last, to the very outskirts of Republic City and Zuko's Republic City villa. All the lights were off, but there was no doubt Iroh was here. Wait here, Asami murmured. The front door was not locked. Iroh. She called. No response. This was getting worrying. Asami went from room to room and still found nothing. Plenty of evidence someone was here or had been recently, but still Iroh. Open bottles of sake and half-finished condolence letters crowded one desk. None of the beds seemed to have been slept in. She was on the verge of giving up when she finally caught a glimpse of him down on the beach, an open bottle of sake beside him and a roaring fire. Iroh. She called as she approached him. Asami, he said in a flat voice, staring out to sea. Are you okay? No reply. People are worried, Iroh. He shrugged and swigged from his bottle. I'm so sorry about Zuko, she said in a soft voice and touched his shoulder. Iroh did nothing. If you need to talk, I'll listen. A burst of fireworks lit up the night sky, celebrations, victory and peace at the cost of so many. Iroh looked up at her and stared. Are you okay? Me. Asami blinked. Iroh gestured to his face and she shook her head. Nothing to worry about. I worried you might be dead before. But Korra found me. You must have known she did, Asami said. I knew. But after you were shot down. He shook his head. I'm still here, and I'm here for you. We're all still here because you lead us to victory. Asami tried a smile, but Iroh was staring at the sea again. Zuko would be proud. She pulled the medal from her pocket and held it out to him. He hardly glanced at it as he snatched it from her hand and threw it into the flames. It happened so fast Asami barely had time to react. "Please leave me," Iroh muttered. "Iroh, what's wrong?" Asami tried again. Was he blaming himself? He could not take responsibility for a volcano, or the technological prowess of the Earth Empire. The revolver fire and the Chenbei fumes, that was what killed people, Iroh. If not for those we wouldn't have lost so many soldiers. "I bear a lot of responsibility," Iroh said. "I was treating people like some Paisho tiles. I had all my moves planned out. I thought it was all for the best, a way to make sure we could win. I managed that at least. So much so I got that medal," he muttered as he gestured at the flames. "I got rewarded after other people lost their lives and sacrificed everything. More than I ever did." "Please don't say that. You just wanted to keep the city safe. We followed you because you lead us. And we made some choices you didn't necessarily want." She sat on the sand beside him. "You just need a break. You need to dash. What I need is to undo my past actions." "What did you do?" Iroh said nothing. "Please, you can tell me anything." Iroh turned to meet her gaze. "I sent Bolin to die. That stunt with the geysers might not have worked so well if he hadn't pulled magma up to the water table. His chance of survival was next to nothing. His whole mission, the real one, not the one Opal and Zuli thought he was doing, it was near impossible to survive." Iroh shook his head. "I was prepared to never see him again. Was it the only way? Would it not have worked without him?" Asami asked hurriedly, wanting to somehow justify his actions. "Oh, it would have worked," Iroh said. "Still, when he was in trouble, all I did was order Opal to retreat without him. She defied me, and she was righter than me. I should take solace that he survived. But now he can't hear. How many people died because of my choices?" He swigged from the sake. "Grandfather would be ashamed of me. At least he never lived to see this," he muttered. Asami could not find any words to say. "Here," Iroh said after a pause and held out her pendant. "Keep it," she muttered and left him to his fire and his drink. She started trembling by the time she was halfway up the beach, her eyes streaming with tears. She did not look back, could not look back, just walked back through the house to Naga. The polar bear dog asked nothing, could do little but be a warming presence and quietly lick her face. Asami let her for a moment and clambered on her back. Future Industries held its own tribute, mostly focusing on the biplane pilots and their families. No one seemed to blame her for surviving when the others did not, and yet it still felt odd somehow, like she should be. Surely someone should be angry with her, hate her for being able to stand up and speak like this. She felt oddly distant as the press conference began. "Captain Sato, you received a medal for founding the biplane unit of the United Forces and your role in the battle." "That's not really a question," Asami replied. The reporter smirked. "Quite. So, if I might ask, what's next for you and Future Industries?" "Easy. I'm not a soldier. And I'm certainly not intending to stay with the United Forces. I helped where I could, but there are other things I feel need me. I intend to head up the restoration of Republic City. My company is about the future and improving the world, not about war. I think we all need to remember that. People need help now more than ever, and I would like to help anyone affected by the war." "Does that include Avatar Korra and Captain Bolin?" "Of course. Captain Bolin especially represents a unique technological challenge. If we can mend hearing losses, replace limbs, just think of what else we could do. Biplanes for hobbies. We will improve communication, transportation, and infrastructure. There are so many orphans who need our help too. So I think you can say we have a lot to do." Captain Sato dash. "I'm giving that up, so, Miss, if you please," Asami interrupted. "Miss Sato then," another reporter said. "Can you comment on General Iroha's withdrawal from public life?" Somehow this had not been something she had anticipated. "Relax. Breath. I believe he is in mourning. Any further questions would be best directed to either the Fire Nation or the United Forces. She caught sight of Korra in the crowd. If you will excuse me, I have another meeting. She paused. But before I go. I lost my father a year ago and with him almost everything I had. As a result of that I learned how it is to live life without privilege. But my story is not that I overcame hardships. I am not here today as a result of purely my own efforts. No one could be. I am here because people helped me and helped others before me. I want everyone to understand that. We need a kinder world, somewhere we can live on, forgive and find happiness, all of us. Thank you. She ducked away from the stage and waited for Korra to make her way to her. Sorry, that overran. It's fine, Korra said, shaking her head. I thought it was a good speech. Thanks. Asami glanced around. Want to see the sunset? There's a great view from the roof. Oh sure, Korra said. Asami smiled and led her up the stairs. I know you're busy, Korra said as they climbed. But I figured I could still ask. Me and Bolin, half of Team Avatar. She stopped. Well, I hope you will. Anyway. Korra shook her head. I'm going to the Earth Kingdom to help things there. I'd love it if you could come too. Asami smiled but shook her head. Thank you for the offer. Once I'd have jumped at that in a heartbeat. Well. I might be able to at some point. First though, I need to go to Zuko's funeral first in the Fire Nation. And then there's the city, the quakes and the volcano really did a number on it. I can't just leave it like this. Maybe I should go to the funeral too. No one's expecting you to go. The Earth Kingdom needs you more than Zuko. Plus might he be in the spirit world? Or would he be reincarnated by now? He might, Korra admitted. They stepped out onto the roof just as the sky was turning orange. The view was not as impressive from a biplane or from the top of the Chenbai, but it was still a wonderful vista. There was so much the city needed now. Railways to add, areas that still lacked an electrical system. They had defended it and now it was time to improve. Asami. Korra. I'm not sure how long this is going to take, the Earth Kingdom I mean. I could be gone a while, Korra said. Then take as long as you need. Asami smiled as Korra looked at her questioningly. I'll be waiting when you get back. And when you do I'll have this place all fixed up. You've done your part, now it's my turn to look after our home. Korra smiled. Thank you. It's in good hands. Opal, a soft familiar voice said behind her. Opal looked around and away from the Bufang Memorial. Zuli looked faintly embarrassed to have intruded on the moment. Wing and Wei kept their heads bowed. Batar's name was on the memorial despite a slight reluctance on the part of a few others. He was still family even after all he had done. Zuli, Opal said, clearing her throat. Is everything okay? Something had happened near City Hall. Your presence is requested, Zuli replied. All of you. She refused to clarify further on the ride over, and attempted to keep out of the event, but Opal grabbed her hand and refused to let go upon their arrival. She needed her, whatever was going on here. And whatever this was also involved Lin. Scary. For a moment the older woman in the room did not register. Memory hit her like a rock. Mom! Opal shouted and rushed to her mother, Wing, and Wei just behind her. Just like you to sit the whole thing out, Lin said, smiling far too much and patting Sue's back. Opal was about to admonish her aunt when Sue laughed. I would have happily traded places. Her hand touched Opal's back and she could not stop the tears. I'm fine. I'm fine. See. Not sure you would, Lin murmured and a tremor passed through Sue. Her brother was practically taboo already, how could they even begin to talk about him? Or Kuvira for that matter. What happened? Opal asked hurriedly. I've been prisoner, and the less said about that the better. Opal's face must have betrayed her worry. I wasn't mistreated. Just being locked up while you were all risking your lives. Sue shook her head. Not to my liking. I was freed a few days ago, sorry it took so long to get back. Now I need to atone for my mistakes. All of them. She smiled. But not you three. I'm so proud of you all. We'll help. Won't we? Opal glanced at her brothers who nodded. We'll help you in whatever needs to happen to the Earth Kingdom. Thank you. We will need all the help we can get, Su said. She glanced at something behind Opal and lowered her head close to her ear. And at some point you will have to introduce me to your girlfriend. Opal glanced up at her. I will always welcome another daughter to the family, especially if she has none of her own. Su trailed off, tears now streaming down her face. Bad choice of words. Too much like her. Opal hugged her mother. It's okay. We're safe. We'll all go home together. The rest of the Earth Empire delegation arrived in Republic City 2 days later. A full council met to discuss the terms of the new country, Fire Lord Izumi and Chief Unalak in attendance. Su looked so tired, question after question continually asking about her captivity. It soon became clear the Earth Empire was nowhere near as united as Kuvira liked to claim, more akin to a ticking time bomb where Kuvira ruled with an iron fist. Her cruelty kept some in line, but inspired many rebels and a growing hatred of her in the population. Some territories had begun to distance and split away from the majority while others increased their aggressive tendencies in taking and retaking land. Su surprised many by readily accepted the role of temporary leader. We request aid from the city and the United Forces. We are almost on the brink of a new civil war already. After so many died in the aftermath of the Equalist attack, we cannot possibly survive the same again. People are tired. Most want peace. And why should the United Forces now help the Empire? Councilwoman Tanyu asked. Our treaty was broken and atrocities soon followed. The Great Uniter herself may be gone, but so many others bear almost an equal guilt to hers. She leaned forward. How sure can we be that you will not simply be a puppet of remaining loyalists? Too many are innocent, Korra broke in. She met Tanyu's gaze without blinking. The queen fell and the kingdom was plunged into chaos. Millions died thanks to famine and those that survived that lost their homes. The only difference between the refugees and the citizens of the Earth Empire is that the latter had no means of escape. Still I fail to see why it is our problem. Tanyu replied. We need to be concerned for our own citizens considering what has happened. I understand that. I want you to all know I will do whatever I can to help the Earth Empire and the Earth Kingdom. But even as the Avatar, I cannot hope to succeed on my own. The Earth Empire was not solely of Kuvira's making, a long history helped form it, along with those who wanted a peace that it might finally bring. Those desires were twisted to support the notion of might is right. She stared around the room. These people were far more concerned with power than treating anyone else as a person. I believe in the people, even now. All the tribes have checkered pasts, we only succeeded this time thanks to bloodshed. The Earth Empire must be afforded the same opportunity to rebuild peacefully, and I will help it even if it takes the rest of my days. Izumi and Unalak voiced a decision to follow the Avatar's example. Su thanked all three of them. The meeting rumbled on. What to do with the captured generals? Should foot soldiers face the same charges as the generals? Korra was the Avatar, a representative of balance, not a judge. But decisions kept falling to her in the end. The generals in higher ranks must be tried in court. I elect Tenzin as judge in these cases, I feel he has a better chance of impartiality. The Kyoshi warriors as headed by Suki and Tai Li will assist. Send the rest of the troops home. Su was nodding. Varric is already in prison. We need to be sure of who he shared his design with. All revolver information is to be destroyed. I will be seeking pledges from your own side that this technology is no longer developed or researched. The meeting went well in the end. Still some tension involving the Earth Empire, but there was optimism too. A new beginning was possible, they could all work together. Korra was sure of it. Bolin blinked in the bright lights and Wei nudged him towards the impromptu podium right ahead. A rumble of recognition was running through the crowd as they equated the man who looked a little unsure of himself in front of the crowd of captured Earth Empire soldiers with the heroic firebender Mako and the mover just finished. Mouths dropped open and hands came together in applause. How loud was it in the 4th prison barracks right now? He smiled and waved. Not enough apparently, Wei nudged him forward again. They wanted him to speak? I get the impression you liked my mover, he began. The cheer that emanated from the crowd reverberated through the floor. He smiled. As some of you know, I am no longer able to hear. So apologies if I get too loud or mess anything up. He paused, but the crowd did not react. Bolin took a deep breath and told them about his life, about Mako's life and all the good in the world. The little and big differences between the mover and real life. And how he was not involved with Asami Sato in any way. The speech at least seemed to go down well. The crowd cheered again as he finished and Bolin was able to leave smiling. The barracks had been a home for the last few months. And now he was leaving, not as quietly as he would have liked despite leaving the uniform behind and once again tying Mako's scarf around his neck. Other soldiers were forever smiling at him or saluting. It was touching, but even if it distracted him for a brief moment, his lack of hearing was impossible to ignore. Was this it for him in the United Forces? He asked Iroh, via letter. The man was impossible to find for some reason. Azula the Hawk took the letter a week ago, still no reply. Would it find its way to him now he was leaving? In the distance ahead of him was the mountain marking the end of his and Korra's first adventure. So much had happened since then. Closer to him were the slums and his old home. The mover seemed to be a hit here, posters for it seemed to be pasted on every street corner, and people recognized him in moments. He smiled and nodded at each as he headed to his old neighborhood. The area was recovering as well as it could in the aftermath of the quake. Bolin had returned several times to help out where he could, rebonding walls, clearing mud, fixing anything. Even just entertaining the kids for a while. The smiles were always wonderful, no less so the ones today. If he could just provide inspiration to the people here, that would be good enough. But more than anything he wanted to see the reminder of the old times. The old tree the shack he shared with Mako leaned against was finally beginning to regrow. New beginnings and everything starting anew. He said his few goodbyes and headed for Air Temple Island, and his brother. Hey Mako, guess what? Bolin stared at the name carved into the rock. I was a captain in the United Forces. And I survived the big war with the Earth Empire. He sighed. Difficult to tell Mako everything, especially his continued affliction. Katara assured him that some of his hearing would come back, but it still seemed like a lost cause. At least he was alive, no reason to give up now. Life was precious, and he needed to live for his family's sake. Footsteps, Korra. Hi Korra, he said without turning around. He grinned as he glanced over his shoulder. She looked surprised, said something, and handed him flowers. Thank you. For Mako. She nodded. He smiled and placed them beside the monument. Korra looked more serious when he turned back. Something wrong. She pointed to herself, then to him and then to the ground. Charades. Korra nodded and repeated the motion. Bolin shook his head. Korra mouthed something. Something about Earth. Earth? He asked. Korra shook her head and pulled a clump of mud from the ground. She held it out to him and then spread her arms, one formed with water. Lots of earth. Korra nodded eagerly and motioned him to keep going. Earth Kingdom. Korra grinned. She pointed between herself and the clump. You're going to the Earth Kingdom? He asked. She nodded, stopped, and then shook her head. She pointed to herself and back to him and then the mud. You want us to both go to the Earth Kingdom? Korra nodded. Can I really do anything? She nodded and repeated the gesture, pointing to him and then to herself again. Together. Despite the communication issues, Korra continued to shower him with love. If only he could hear her voice again. His expression must have betrayed his worries. Korra took his hand and she said one word. Bolin frowned and concentrated on her lips as she repeated it, the movements becoming slower. Everything? He asked. She nodded and tightened her grip on his hand. So, everything. So much to do and try, and how could they know what they could do unless they tried? No way he could stop just because his hearing was gone. Just like we promised, Bolin said. She nodded and kissed him for an eternity, and when she finally pulled away it was all he could do to stare at her beauty and kiss her all over again. Then let's go, she said. Her lips were easy to read this time. Maybe Tenzin's family were teasing him as he ran to pack. Maybe they were cheering him on. The stories were always about glories and power, but everything he wanted was here. Family and love. His self-made destiny, wherever Korra went he would go to. His story was not even close to ending. People crowded onto the airship dock to see the Avatar off. Small children rushed to hug her legs while their parents looked faintly embarrassed. No time for much, the airship was about to depart. Reporters snapped pictures of her and Bolin, no one asked him questions though. It felt so good just to hold his hand, just to know he was here with her and that he would be going forward with her. Not like he could answer easily. One final statement, one last press conference. It was time for peace, healing and compassion. They should forgive but never forget the recent events, the crystal structure a constant reminder of what happened. There were others to see her before she went, huge crowds of people with uniforms from many different organizations. Benders, non-benders, fire, earth and water benders. All here to volunteer alongside her, to follow her lead. Huge donations and pledges of support from so many. Time to go. The acolytes had loaded their bags and many asked to go with her to attend to her. She had to politely but firmly turn 3 down before they stopped asking. One last hug for Tenzin and his family. One for Mom and Dad. And one for Asami who winced as she embraced Bolin. I'm sorry Bolin said worried. It's nothing, Asami said gesturing at her ribs. She blinked and shook her head. A kiss for each of them. Take care. Come on Avatar, time to go, Lin called from behind them. See you soon, Korra said as she and Bolin walked up the gangplank to join Wing, Wei, Opal, and Zuli. Asami waved with the others as Korra left home again. They would not be gone for that long, not really. But then again, she would be away as long as it took. They stayed on deck and waved, so many people all waving and cheering as the airship rose. As Republic City finally shrank behind them, Korra looked forward to the future and smiled. The Saga of Avatar Korra. Epilogue. The cold air whirled around the ice tent, but it was hard to care at the moment. Asami was inside with Korra, the interior space warmed by the blazing fire the other girl had bent out of thin air a mere moment before. She shuffled closer, the heat actually becoming a little overwhelming, a little too hot. Asami blinked her eyes open. Sunlight streamed through the blinds and a warm body was pressed against her, small hands clinging to her arm. Yuki was dozing peacefully and only stirred a little as Asami hugged her. The girl nuzzled against her and her breathing evened out again. Hard to get up now, at least she was not due to head into the office much anymore. So, while there might be some sign-offs waiting downstairs, they could wait for now. Asami dozed a bit longer until someone opened the door an uncertain time later. A familiar face looked into the room and Asami smiled up at her. Morning. Korra's gaze flicked to Yuki. So she is here? Yeah. She just dozed off when I was reading her stories, Asami replied softly. It was impossible to overstate Yuki's appreciation for stories, she took after her grandfather like that. Good morning sweetie, Korra said quietly as she gently shook her granddaughter. Yuki blinked at her for a moment and buried her head under the covers. Come on, Korra chided. Aunt Sammy is awake as well you know. We need to go have breakfast. Yuki made no move to leave the bed. Korra sighed in mock annoyance and tossed back the sheets. The small girl remained curled on the bed until Korra flung her over her shoulder. Gran. The little girl smiled at last and giggled. 2 eggs per person, some 30 eggs then. Got to practice this again, cracking eggs was easy using water, and even one-handed. But she took the egg gingerly into her right hand and squeezed, just enough to break the shell. At least that was idea. Not gentle enough, her metallic fingers were now coated with egg white. Yuck. More practice? Or was this just not a great use for her metal arm? Who else is coming? Asami asked behind her as she diced vegetables. Min said he'll be by after lunch but he can't stop. He's just dropping the girls off, Korra replied swiping at her metallic fingers with a cloth. Maybe she should give up on this one and just get the spare. Asami stopped cutting. Is he really not staying any longer? She looked thoughtful as Korra glanced at her. Though I suppose if he hangs on he won't make it to Ember Island in time. Yep, Korra said, cracking a new egg against the bowl. Though we couldn't have expected him to pass up that seminar, State Formation and Nationalism. And at the Ba Sing Se University as well? All the top Earth Federation scholars were there. Asami chuckled. One step closer to his dream. Maybe he can run in the next election. Korra shook her head. He can't, he needs at least a 20-year residency first. She kept one eye on the eggs and another on the grandchildren in the living room. The mover must be getting interesting, they were all staring at the screen rapt with attention. The tale of Avatar Jinji, possibly the best written, acted, and produced of the unfortunately variable Avatar movers, or at least the ones starring Bolin. Certainly it was the most family-friendly. The audio was just about audible from here, they had reached the scene Bolin won an award for. I never wanted to be an Avatar. Jinji growled. But for the sake of the world, to free the Water Tribe, I will defeat Chief Waka using whatever is necessary. The extras in the scene cheered and applauded. Korra smiled to herself. Gran. A small voice asked, accompanied by a tug on her pant leg. Korra looked down. Hi, Shio. What's up? Grandpa has a thing in his ear. She cocked her head as she fingered her ear. What is it? A hearing aid, Korra replied. Aunt Sammy made it for him. One of my finest achievements, Asami added. Though it took years to get right. Korra nodded. And before that we used sign language. Me and your grandfather had to learn it from scratch. But then Aunt Sammy had her breakthrough. She pointed towards the cabinet in the living room, the one filled with Bolin's trophies, awards, and assorted memorabilia. It's in there if you want to look at it. Gran. Hikari had wandered from the living room as Shio stared in the direction Korra pointed. Can we watch Avatar One next? The magnificent Avatar One, always popular with the kids. Maybe later. Don't forget we're going out to the beach this morning. Hikari's expression lightened, and along with Shio returned to the mover and the third of the 4 avatars Bolin had played in his career. Wan, Taro, Jinji, and Fukui. A sudden beating of wings drew Korra's attention to the window. That sounded a lot like Druk, and in a moment the children had rushed outside to see the dragon. Korra took her time as she wiped her hands. She's cutting it fine, Asami noted. She has a lot to worry about, Korra replied. But she still made it. Come on. Outside, Yuzu's sons, Mamoru and Shouta, slipped from Druk's back and at Korra's slight insistence hugged her and Asami. The rest of the children were far more interested in petting Druk. Thanks for keeping an eye on them, Yuzu said from her perch on the dragon's neck. Anytime, Korra smiled. Look at you, Asami cooed to Mamoru. You're looking more and more like the last Fire Lord every time I see you. You're going to grow up to be as handsome as your grandfather. She glanced up to Yuzu. Would you like to have some breakfast with us? Love to, Yuzu said. But I have prob ending today so I can't really stop. Next time maybe. Thanks again for watching them and I'll see you later. Druk soared into the air with a thrash of his wings after Asami shepherded the children back enough to give him space for takeoff. Several of the kids clambered onto Korra, who just smiled as she strode seemingly unconcerned back inside. Everyone was now accounted for, time for breakfast. Asami was frowning at the paper after the meal and as the mover resumed. Something wrong? Korra asked. It's an article from Pearl. Opal's Pearl? Korra asked. Asami nodded. Unusual. What does she say? Asami blinked. Okay, I know you hate jargon. Scientific jargon anyway, Korra murmured. Right. So for your benefit I will try and summarize. Asami took a deep breath. It's about the impact on the environment of the Battle of Republic City. Like the canal Iroh had constructed resulted in an invasion of sea fish into the region, and specifically into the Salt Lake. All the species previously residing there died off pretty quickly. Iroh took responsibility though and insisted on paying for the restoration of the habitat. Asami grinned. Now for the really cool bit. Avatar Korra, she said glancing at her friend. Managed a feat never before recorded in any description of bending. She goes on to talk about how you converted lava and magma into crystal. Everyone knows that bit, of course. But what is new is that people finally figured out just how far down you reached. Seems you managed to create a crystal region the size of Ba Sing Se above ground, but something almost 3 times that size underneath. And it looks a lot like that's preventing earthquakes in the region quite effectively. How about that? Korra said. I remember doing it, but... She shook her head. Oh, Asami said. And Pearl theorizes if you hadn't done that. She looked up. The ash could very likely have blotted out the sun and lead to a worldwide winter. She says she can't be sure on how long it would last, but reckons it could easily have been more than a century. Yikes, Korra muttered. Well, I really don't think I'm up to doing something like that ever again, so I hope no one has any plans to try that kind of stunt anytime soon. She smiled. Maybe in 10,000 years, once Vato comes back, I reckon I'd be ready then. Asami shivered. I hate the idea he can come back, however long it takes. But I know it's how these things work. Right. Right, Korra replied and used her metal thumb to slice open yet another letter from Square Studios. Another request for another mover based on her life. She handed it wordlessly to Asami. Again. I see they're still making your wedding the epilogue, she said smiling. Can't get away from that cliché apparently. Korra huffed. It's so tiresome. And it's not like that was the best part of being with him. Afterwards was coming home to see him and he'd have dinner ready, or be doing something else to the house or in the garden. Korra glanced at the window and towards the sunflowers. And 8 kids. They were all the best parts. The wedding was a few months of panic and people overreacting for just a few hours in the end. Never quite saw the point. She sighed. Though I guess we're not very interesting as we are now. And people seem less entertained by happily family life anyway, Asami commented. Still, trying to capture our current life in a mover would not be easy. Korra laughed. We should write them a script. Her grin widened. With all kinds of not quite so accurate stuff. Make people start asking questions. Still, she took the letter back and scanned it again. Amazing how they keep wanting to retell the same story. It's profitable. There's always something someone doesn't like with the other versions. Or they don't like the actress, or the sets don't look as good. She smiled. In the end it's a story people love. Of course they do, it's a good story, Korra said. Check the description for the links to the author.